Hey you, if you've not watched part 1 of the device theory reaction, what the heck are you doing? Watch that first, it makes so much more sense. This is part 2, you dingus, but I love you, don't worry. Go watch that and then come back, I'll be right here. But if you've already watched it, welcome. We're doing part 2 device theory. This is called part 2 demo, Deltarune and the Fourth Wall, so it should be pretty fun, hopefully. I know what you're thinking. They really race swap Peter from Deadpool 2. I'm trying something new. I'm trying a mustache. Please let me know what you think. If it's horrible, I'll shave it. If not, I don't know. Maybe I'll keep it. We'll see. It's my first time rocking just a tash. Since I was like 14 and grew a bit of facial hair. Also, just before we get in, make sure you enter the giveaway and join the Discord and the John Roots art competition. People been entering. I've not looked at any, but I get notifications of the channel, so people be entering. So make sure to share your John Roots artwork on the Discord and on Twitter. I'll be checking it out on Twitter, and hopefully you do that. And I'll catch you. Well, get some snacks, get some drinks. This is a long video. It's 2.5 hours. I mean, tomorrow is gonna be a doozy, but hey, let's get into this bad boy. As always, full credits down below. I'm just reacting at the end of the day, but hopefully you enjoy the reaction, and I'll catch you in there. Alrighty. Device theory part 2. Let's get into this bad boy. I'm excited.
Hey, this is the second in a 3-part analysis I am doing on Deltarune's potential meta-narrative and examining the secrets within the game, parts of its internal data, and even stuff like the user interface to see what picture it paints for Deltarune's message on a meta level. This part will be discussing the 2021 demo and the spamton sweepstakes, and would be pretty much continuing right from where part 1 left off. If you'd like to watch part 1 first, though, there will be a card linking you to that video, and some links in the description so you can see what I already covered. And obviously, this will be spoiling Deltarune and perhaps some parts of Undertale as well, so I'd recommend you play those games if you haven't already. With that out of the way, whether or not you watch part 1 or played these games, get comfy, and I hope you enjoy even more rambling of the funny video game.
I am pretty
Enjoy.
comfy.
Good morning. It's
Good morning.
September 17, 2021, and if you can believe it, it's a once again.
Holy shit, the brain rot. You guys weren't lying, it is pretty brain rotted.
I'm not royal to anybody. I don't have amnesia. They forgot that I'm him.
This is beautiful, holy shit. Oh my god, I'm only imagining what it was like when Chris opened the Dark World, the community's reaction, and then having to wait. Holy shit, that must have been crazy.
A few days prior, a livestream was held in celebration of Undertale's 6th anniversary, in which Toby and the 3 dads played through a slightly modified version of Deltarune Chapter 1 for some reason. Toby gave some pretty interesting insight into the creative process for Chapter 1, as well as this main tidbit here about the Susie vs. Lancer fight.
So if you notice, the hearts come from the top right.
Yeah, the hearts.
That's where Chris is. It's not a bug.
But it was at the end of the livestream that the fandom collectively
Oh.
lost their shit, including myself, as it was revealed to all be a build-up for the release of Deltarune Chapter 2, which we got a glimpse of at the very end of the broadcast, and a release of September 17th at 8 PM Eastern Standard Time. And on that day, and time just before it released proper, a certain someone would return with some new words to share with us. I couldn't get any actual archives on the Wayback Machine of the Twitter account when Gaster took over again for Chapter 2, at least that I know of, so you'll just have to believe me when I say that it was the same deal as Chapter 1's takeover, with the account going dark and yet again the name just being 6 boxes. He remarks on how long it's been since Chapter 1's release, and commends everyone for sticking around through these difficult times, implying that perhaps even Gaster has been going through it in the absolute travesty that the past few years have ended up being. He then says that Deltarune glows brightly from our hope, before sending the link to the website once again to the second field, the second connection. And right then and there, the demo for Deltarune that we know of releases on Steam and itch.io, which includes the first 2 chapters of the game, and now we can begin talking about this more recent demo properly. Hopefully this won't be as lengthy to explain as with Survey Program, as at this point I'll just be noting things that have changed from the previous demo, and of course any trends I notice in Chapter 2 and how things have developed from Chapter 1 meta-wise. However,
Oh god.
before I truly get into Part 2 properly, I want to dedicate a chunk of this video to making sure that it is not out of date in context with Part 1's release, considering—
Okay, also, before we get into this, I just want to say thank you so much for the love and support, by the way. I know I say it a lot, but I really do mean it. I'm really grateful. This is so... I'm glad that people enjoy watching my stupid reactions. Hopefully we can keep on doing it. If there's anything you want to see, please send in the Discord. I'm going to give you a spoiler alert. On Sunday, I'm going to be reacting to some FNAF lore, because I know absolutely nothing about Five Nights at Freddy's, so we're going to give that a go. So hopefully you enjoyed that. But someone asked me recently if there's like a Patreon or something. Don't worry about that. I think like the best way to support is just taking part in the community, because I just want to build a pretty cool community. That's like my main focus. So joining the Discord would be the best way. But I just want to thank you really from the bottom of my heart for the love and support in these videos. It really does make me really happy, and I'm really grateful for that. He says, I'll try to do my Mumdani smile. Thanks guys, I can't do it. I'm working on my Mumdani smile. But thank you, I really do appreciate it. And yeah, if you enjoy this content, I would say just check out the live streams as well. I feel like it's a better... when I'm bouncing off people, I'm funnier, I would say. So be sure to check that out. But thank you so much. And also, my question for today's video, is... where are you watching the video? Because I've had some pretty strange answers in the comments. Not strange, but cool ones. Like someone said they were watching this on the treadmill at the gym. I was like, hell yeah. And someone said they're listening to it at work. I was like, okay, I could definitely see it as a podcast type of thing. But yeah, let me know if you're listening to this in a strange location, or your bedroom, or your living room with your family. Which, if that's the case, hi mom and dad, or parental guardian, or family dog. I don't know. Let's just
this audio and script were originally made before I became a niche Deltarune celebrity, and the video being made after the fact. Although I am saving most of my sappy words and thank yous for the end of the series, while I'm very happy with how Part 1 has been received, and very happy with how well it appears I have managed to resonate with a good portion of the fan base, I want to take a few solid minutes to patch up some holes in Part 1 and critique myself a little bit, as especially after responding to many comments from Part 1, there are things that I have either gotten outright wrong, things that I have somehow managed to not include, or things that I just think would be neat to mention otherwise in the grander scheme of this series. So, let me quickly go through what I'll describe as a sort of lightning round, but not really, of corrections and revisions for those who have watched Part 1, and for the sake of keeping my info as accurate as possible.
Makes sense.
One, and I feel is most important to mention, in Part 1 of the device theory, I called attention to a few lines of code in the game's data that I thought implied that if the player's name of the light world was 7 or more characters long, that the name would change the question marks, implying that we would at some point play as another character in the light world altogether. Consider this point completely and objectively wrong. Shortly after Part 1's release, I was pinged on Andrew Cunningham's Discord server by Brix, who you might know for his video on the Submarine Castletown theory. If you don't, check it out, it's cool. But I quickly got clarification that this is actually leftover data from Undertale's UI code. See, in Undertale, your name can only be 6 characters long at the most. The game even makes a joke about this when you try to enter the name Papyrus, as you aren't able to enter the last letter of his name. But if you manage to hack your name to be longer than that through file editing, text would display in the stats menu that would say, easy to change, huh? For reference, this is where the Since Chapter 1 text would display in Deltarune. And this is where the question marks actually display. It is just pasted over from Undertale's code, except instead of easy to change, it's these 3 question marks. Nothing actually happens to the player name. While I do still find it odd that this text was changed in Deltarune to begin with, I will say that at this point, I would not put too much stock into this information to begin with anymore. It might be important later down the line, but chances are it doesn't really mean anything, and there's nothing we can really easily make of it right now, especially compared to pretty much everything that I'm about to touch on in this part. And while not about this piece of code anymore, I do want to mention something else about the UI real quick that I think is worth clarifying, which is that technically in Undertale your attack and defense stats do actually also start at 10. But for some reason at Undertale it's subtracted so that it displays as 0, but as a base it does start at 10. I've also seen the explanation that perhaps Chris's stats are different simply because they're older than Frisk, which I guess that checks out, but who knows really, but it does make sense to me honestly. 2. This is less of a...
Okay, I've got a pretty important question for you. Not important, but I'm just curious. If you had to save one in a fire, Chris or Frisk, who you saving? Did I just unironically do a 6-7? Fuck. But out of the two, who would you pick? Who's your favorite? Who's the character you prefer? Who's your favorite, you know?
This is less of a correction, but more of a critique of my own theorizing process in regards to Gaster that I'd like to touch on, but there are things I feel I should have included in part 1 regarding him that ultimately slipped my radar.
You know.
One thing that I'm kind of shocked I never mentioned about Gaster as a potential calling card or part of his mannerisms is his constant allusions and connections to hands. The man who speaks in hands, the website in 2018 saying, "Take it in your hands," with that last word having a noticeable line break and that phrase coming up more than once, the potential allusion to hands through wingdings as a font, even Susie mentioning hands after the spamton neophyte, although that is chapter 2 material, so it's no wonder I never really mentioned it in part 1. While I suppose it doesn't tell me too much about Gaster as a character still, it does still feel worth mentioning and could be a decent way of identifying his relevance in any given situation. Aside from that, the critique about my theorizing process comes in what I would deem to be actually Gaster, as in what actually is worth putting stock into associating with him. In part 1, I was incredibly picky in this regard. I only wanted to stick to things that would directly acknowledge him, undoubtedly, without having to make more than a few connections back to him, even going as far as to differentiate things like the use of man and him,
I have
or
a theory
not associating
that
the mystery man or the man behind the tree with Gaster
is in
outright.
Gaster's form.
While I do still believe this meticulousness was warranted to an extent thanks to the countless fandom Mandela effects that have spawned surrounding him, I'd like to be a little bit more lenient from here on in that regard. I don't want to undermine the fact that there is plenty of reason to believe that the mystery man at least is Gaster, and that the man behind the tree undoubtedly could be tied to him in some way or what have you. And in retrospect, I think being so meticulous at undermining the allusions to him through the word man, as it might be someone other than him, seems a little bit silly on my part. Saying that it's someone other than him, and saying that it is him, the Venn diagram in that case would be just a fucking circle practically. In both cases, it is a character we know very little about, and someone who we likely will learn more about over the course of Deltarune's narrative. While I still don't want to assume without any doubt that Gaster straight up is the mystery man, or the man behind the tree, or even the strange someone who spoke to Jevil, or the person who was talking to Spamton over the phone, some of these leads were clearly placed with intent, with us to be able to connect it back to him eventually, and that was the point that I was trying to get across in part 1 at least. We might not know to what extent and how many proxies there may be before we get to the man himself in some cases, but with us only having 2 chapters, I think that honestly doesn't matter all too much. And personally, I
really don't know if part 3 of this goes over chapter 3 and 4. I really hope it does.
I think there is a way to be able to say that cases like the Mystery Man especially can both be Gaster and not be Gaster, and have those interpretations coexist. I'll touch on this a little bit more in part 3. But my point is, with Gaster especially, I think I started teetering on the edge a bit of the other extreme of the theorizing spectrum, where you start to worry too much about the minor details and things that don't connect yet, even though you already have the general idea and the intent that was meant to be sent across, and in this case, I think that general idea is pretty clear to me when you look at all of these things in conjunction. That being, regardless of how you think it manifests, or in what way, all of these things do in fact connect back to him. He might not always be directly involved, or maybe these instances of him aren't final, but I believe that he does not always have to be. What matters is that he is present, and for now I believe that can be good enough for us to work with, considering we only have 2 chapters to work with still. 3. I mentioned in part 1 that I had a lot of issues really connecting another hymn, or man.ogg, to Gaster's theme properly. In all of my digging and examining of each of these songs, I personally came to the conclusion that Gaster's theme ultimately isn't really a good calling card at all for Gaster, as his leitmotif doesn't really seem to actually appear in another hymn or man.ogg. While I think this still seems to be the case, what did slip my radar was that the intervals between the notes are still very similar, which is a fair point. While they don't outright copy Gaster's theme, I think this is a case where I can safely still assume that another hymn especially is related to him, because while it's not using the same motif, it's clearly still made with the same intent. Different songs, but made with the same idea. Perhaps Gaster's theme could be taken as a sort of precursor or demo of another hymn even. Smiled OGG, however, I realize can be put in the opposite situation where it actually might not be fully reliable as a calling card for Gaster, but rather Dark Worlds in general. Although personally, I feel like this still could fall into a similar theory pitfall that I mentioned in the last correction, where even if it might not directly involve him in all cases, it certainly still ties back to him, and Dark Worlds in general can tie back to him in several ways. Especially if my take on all of this in part 3 turns out to be ringing true after all, then really separating Smiled OGG's relevance to Gaster from its relevance to Dark Worlds might not be all that necessary at the end of the day. But as always, we'll just have to wait.
Out of curiosity, would you guys like to see me make a video where I make a theory? Not a theory, but I just say what I think's gonna happen. Based off everything I've learned and whatnot, would you like to just see a prediction video? Let me know if that's something you'd want to see. I mean, it won't be edited to this level. I'm bad at editing.
Man.OGG is ripped straight from the collection of fan tracks Toby made that were inspired by Yume Nikki. Man.OGG here being named as Waltz of Sakam Masada. Sakam Masada, to be specific, is a monochrome character who appears in the spaceship in Yume Nikki.
I forgot about
Given
this.
Gaster's obvious inspirations from Yume Nikki and Oboa and what have you, this could be potential hints towards him being more involved with the egg shenanigans and the men behind the tree, but regardless, I'm kind of baffled that this slipped by me, honestly. Also throwing this in very last minute, but I feel implored to call your attention to Andrew Cunningham's recent video on Gaster's theme and its potential presence in the DELTARUNE Lore, as it's a much more informed and in-depth look at the whole thing, and one that I think was very much needed for the community and for future theory crafting purposes. Even with my knowledge in making music, I wouldn't call myself an expert at analyzing it or the theory behind it, and Andrew does very well in that regard with what is effectively the closest we have at the moment to an actual encyclopedia of sorts on quotes of his theme and the varying strength of said quotes. So do check it out if you want a more in-depth look at how songs like Another Hymn, Man.OGG, and a bunch of other ones seem to have hints of it laced within. It's a very good watch, and one that I think has clarified a lot of the confusion I felt initially about the theme altogether. Also, just look at this fucking doohickey that he whipped up in like Godot or whatever. How could you not appreciate the fucking mechanism? It's cool. Give it a look if you haven't already. But moving on. 4. About Gallery. I'm still kind of stumped on what to make of it really, but I have gotten plenty of comments from part 1 about an actually pretty plausible possibility for what the title could be referring to. The concept of a rogues gallery. For those unfamiliar, rogues gallery refers to, generally, a collection of nefarious individuals.
There's a lot of
this
rogues.
could be referred to in real life as a collection of mugshots of criminal suspects, or more likely, in fictional media, refers to a lineup of recurring antagonists that show up throughout a story, which does check out very closely to what we're currently dealing
Every hero has a rogues gallery, okay, but Batman's is the one I think of first.
with in Deltarune's structure and how it has handled in
I do love Spider-Man. I don't want that downplay to have Spider-Man right here. Spider-Man's awesome. I don't want... I think that on the record.
We'll have to see more of the game ultimately to really be sure, but honestly this does seem like the most likely interpretation for what the title gallery could be alluding to. And I wouldn't put it past Toby at all for him to make some kind of nod to this concept, given it has played in both chapters to preface a boss fight with the main recurring antagonist. 5. While Spamton, Jevil, Sham, and Rouse are still my main 4 characters that I think are particularly important for Deltarune's meta-narrative, they aren't the only Darkners to happen to have some more meta-knowledge. In fact, Darkners in general seem to be actually decently aware of the nature of their world, or at least the mechanics of it, such as the battle system and some elements of said battle system. Although, I've gotten a lot of comments about Lancer in particular, as he's another character who actually straight up mentions player controls in this sign here that you can read in the field in Chapter 1, and him alluding to the
hated Lancer. I really hated Lancer when I first played. But, like, I would describe Lancer as, like, a dog. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not a big... Oh, this is going to be a really hot take. I'm not a massive dog guy. I think they're cool. I just think cats are better. But my buddy has a dog who is a wild beast. Okay, his name's Parker. A wild beast is an understatement. But the more time you spend with him, you're like, he's kind of adorable. Low-key, like, yeah, he's a wild beast, but he's a cute wild beast. That's the exact way I feel about Lancer.
And showing up in it if he happened to ignore Rousey's request to listen to him upon first arriving in Castletown. He definitely does show some signs of being more aware than some other Darkners, but it does seem like he and other characters don't really call too much attention to this, and Lancer himself doesn't seem very bothered at all about this awareness himself. Unlike a certain someone who I'll talk about later in this part. 6. The glass shard that you can get in the light world upon obtaining a shadow crystal in the dark world has one thing that I forgot to really specify. We don't really know if it actually is a glass shard fully. See, we know that the
Okay.
shadow crystal is described as only being visible thanks to its sharp shadow, and in the light world it's possible that it doesn't actually change in appearance between worlds, but rather that the light world could be misidentifying it as a shard of glass because it doesn't know what else to refer to it as. In the light world, it just describes it as a shard of something that feels like glass, but before it trails off. There is the possibility that it is just glass, but at the same time, I think the potential for the light world's UI and for the light world in general to pretty much be finding ways to get around the fact that you have an actual literal magic crystal, something that would otherwise likely be impossible to possess in the light world, is a very fascinating prospect to me, especially in the context of the meta-narrative. It's also especially worth noting, as I do think that the shadow crystals will culminate into something that could prove incredibly important for said meta-narrative later down the line, and possibly even for Gaster himself. And finally, 7. I mentioned that the Switch port of Undertale was the second one to come out. Technically, while it is the second
Tutorial
unique console
animation's
port in
so
terms of having different
cursed.
contents from the PC one, it is actually the third port, as the first and second ports were for the PS4 and the PS Vita, the latter of which completely slipped my radar, although as far as I know the PS4 and Vita ports are identical in their contents. And that is it for the corrections. Although, there is still one more thing I'd like to talk about in Chapter 1 before diving into the 2021 demo properly that wasn't mentioned in the comments, but I do think is worth mentioning regardless, and it relates to the thing I mentioned Toby acknowledging in the 6th anniversary stream, in regards to the fight between
Chris's
Susie
heart
and Lancer.
being...
I'm going to touch on this later, but in
That
both
is really
chapters of the game
interesting.
so far, there's a moment where Rouse can shift the player's perspective to Susie's point of view, so to speak, so that Rouse can talk to Chris off-screen. In Chapter 1's instance of this, though, we get a fight that is triggered by Susie after being betrayed by Lancer. The thing about this fight, though, which I found especially odd since Toby pointed it out, is that whenever your soul pops up to dodge Lancer's attacks, the soul comes from off-screen, specifically from the general direction that Chris and Rousey's cell would be. I think I just didn't touch on this initially, because while I did find it odd, I had honestly no idea what to make of it. In fact, given I am adding this in after already having finished the general script, I still really don't. But this was another instance where perhaps a better look at the UI might help me a bit here for this fight and for the Dark World's battle system in general. Let's first start with the way the game changes when you start a normal battle. The background changes to this sort of grid-like pattern that shifts along the screen. And when you have to dodge attacks, I want you to pay attention to one little detail. You see it? Let me zoom in a little.
Oh, it does? I'd never noticed that.
Even though the soul is only pulled out for the purpose of dodging attacks, the graphic that's used to indicate its ejection
exact
is the
same.
same one that's used when Chris pulls it out themselves. By itself, this is a really small detail and doesn't mean much. But we know that,
Still,
barring Chris's restrictions on it when they pull it out in the light world, we are able to move the soul ourselves when it's not controlling anyone. Which then brings me to another UI element. This box. No, not that one, not yet. This one. I do have to admit that honestly, I don't have much to go off of with this, but if I can take any shot in the dark right now, I'd like to think that, at least thanks to the fact the box is outlined in green, which kind of reminds me of the way the Chapter 1 pre-completion save menu looks, and I think with the way the background for battles normally looks, save for most boss fights, it does make me now wonder if perhaps more attention should be called to the way the battle system is presented, and if perhaps there's some piece of meta stuff to look for here. Considering that this animation of the soul's ejection is used both for Chris pulling the soul out themselves and for whenever the soul's put into this box, the only conclusion I can make right away is that in both of these cases the soul does genuinely get pulled out of Chris. In the former, it's of their own volition, but in the latter, it's done so in a way that's almost automatic, as in it's still taken out of Chris, but not in a way that puts them in that exhausted state that we see them in when they pull it out in the light world. Perhaps because all the UI elements that the soul gets pulled into work on a completely different layer meta-wise compared to the darker light worlds themselves. Upon further reflection, this
I feel
isn't
like
really
it's
that
a
far
leap.
off
I
from how
feel
Undertale
okay.
handled.
I know, I know we gotta grasp at straws here when we're doing theories, but I feel like, and I'm gonna be a horrible person for saying this, he's just reusing stuff. I'll be real. But it is good to like
UI
pick
with
up on,
Santorum
you know what I mean, like,
especially
and
being
make note
examples
of.
of fucking with it, but I think in both cases, it reflects a similar sort of intention, in that, more especially for Deltarune, because we know that Darkners are more aware of the battle system and its mechanics in general, the soul being in this green box further implying that the UI is diegetic to the game in some way could be not necessarily that the UI is a tangible thing to the characters, but is a way of sort of conveying their capabilities through bullet hell visuals. In essence, I'm not saying that this has to be taken literally, but that the soul has to be ejected as a means of getting the player more involved and further connecting the bridge between the reality, our inputs, and what happens in the game itself to the program that we are experiencing Deltarune through. Regardless though, it does tell me that the soul is taken out of Chris either way, even if very temporarily, and for battles it seems to be sort of pre-programmed, or rather more necessary, where the control over whether a battle can trigger or not is not solely dependent on the player. We see at least with Susie that she triggers the battle herself against our will, and I do find that to be pretty important. Since that tells me, aside from her having a lot of her own will to be able to override the player's choices, the battle system is also not something that we have full control of. In a way, you can see this as early as in Chapter 1 when you had to initially warn enemies about Susie so that they won't get hurt by her. But even the act of dodging attacks from a meta standpoint happens in a way that's more automatic. Remembering what Rousey said about how the soul contains our will and compassion and most importantly the fate of the world, perhaps there's some connection to make there. The soul has to be along for the ride since that's how enemies attack you, and considering that the condition to getting a game over is for everyone in the party to lose their HP and not just Chris, and knowing that other Darkners seem to have a good baseline grasp of how the battle system works, this feels like an instance where it makes sense to me why Gaster, or the Fun Gang in general, would need the player's input. If the enemy's attacks are in some way attacking the fate of the world, you need something that will help control that fate and keep it out of harm's way. Furthermore, on this topic of the fate of the world being attacked, you can actually die in the Susie versus Lancer fight. Or at least, if Susie somehow happens to go down, even though Chris and Rousey, while not present, are still up, Susie is the only character that appears in this segment and who participates in this fight on the player's end, and hence, her going down counts as a game over. What this further reinforces to me is that game overs don't necessarily depend on whether Chris in particular survives, but whether you preserve the HP of every character involved in a battle until it has concluded, and so that the game can continue on its intended course. Perhaps this is why Toby might have placed emphasis on the fact that Chris's soul came from specifically where their cell would be.
I mean, yeah,
because
like, Susie's vital to the prophecy, and if Susie dies, the prophecy can't continue, so they need to restart. Yeah, that makes sense. It
could be to further drive home the fact that even if Chris is not directly involved in a battle, and even if Chris's soul comes from their body regardless of if they're one initiating any battles, it doesn't change that this battle has been triggered and you need to do your part. It does not matter where you are when it happens. My point here is that I think looking at the battle system solely through the lens of HP, or getting a game over through the lens of everyone is dead, might not necessarily be the move, but rather looking at the battle system as simply another means to which the game has given you the task of making sure the story continues as it should. There is a prophecy to fulfill after all. So, perhaps the more meta way to look at the soul in context with battles is that they're not battles. They're simply just story beats that the game needs you to pass through. And if everyone goes down, then that outcome simply isn't possible, therefore you have failed to progress the story, and therefore game over. And if you promise,
I've not watched this before.
And leave it at that, but regardless, that story beat will still be there blocking you until you pass through it. That metaphorical tap in this case will be waiting until you run it. These are not simply fights. This is what must happen.
Jesus Christ.
I'll touch on this when I get to my theory proper, but I guess my point is, I have no idea why there's such a focus placed on this soul appearing from where Chris would be during the fight between Susie and Lancer, but given the way the battle system is presented and how certain bosses tend to manipulate that presentation, especially spamton Nia with how that specific fight is when we see the soul turn yellow, very convenient tutorial included, I do think it actually plays rather strongly into my theory, so I'll leave it at that for now. But I'd keep it in mind. With that out of the way though, and to actually finally talk about the game, I'll start with what happens when you open this demo because it's something that still takes me aback even now.
Deltarune.
To quickly remind you, whenever you completed Survey Program on subsequent openings of the demo, the game would open with the legend cutscene that you get when you let Rousey tell you about the prophecy before showing the logo and then sending you to the save menu. In this demo, Assuming you've already completed Chapter 1, the game just immediately gives you a prompt asking if you want to continue to Chapter 2. And if you don't do that, or if you haven't played Chapter 1 at all, you will be met with the game's Chapter Select menu. Say for a prompt asking if you want to start with Chapter 1 already, with the ambience being that droning yet again from the Game Over screen in the beginning of Chapter 1. As it stands, we know that there are at least 7 chapters judging from this screen, and the code does suggest that it is accounting for only 7, although there is placeholder code for a Chapter 0 that I've noticed, but let's just say that that's what it is, right? Just placeholder, right? I don't know what I'll do if Toby actually makes Chapter 0 a real part of the game. But I always found this menu interesting ever since the demo launched, mainly because this is always the first thing that you are met with when you launch the game.
You play as
Not
Des
that
in a
intro cutscene
prequel?
of Legend, just this. You only get that cutscene when you enter a chapter that you have completed. And hopefully this is my last minute audio that I need to do for this part, but this came completely out of nowhere and I have to mention it. Essentially, I was implying earlier that thanks to how the game only showed the cutscene upon entering a completed chapter, but the game otherwise launched at the chapter select screen, part of my theory assumes that perhaps the chapter select menu is meant to function as a sort of launcher for Deltarune. Kind of like its own OS in a way, where each chapter is its own game that you can launch, and that may even open the possibility for future chapters to look, function, and even be completely different from the Deltarune that we know now. Keep in mind, I made this assumption since like October or November of 2022, and the code of the game already sort of suggested this because while there's files for every sprite and such in the game, there's a whole separate group of files that are a bunch of duplicates but named specifically with Chapter 1 at the end, implying that depending on what chapter you play, it would load from a specific group of files. However, rather recently it's come out that Toby has been working with some people developing GameMaker on an upcoming feature for the engine that allows for a launcher app to be utilized for the purpose of launching multiple games from a specific selection, and Toby is working with them to incorporate this system into Deltarune and its chapter select system. Oh. So, I guess I'm kind of right on this? What the fuck?
I haven't heard of that.
We don't really know the implications of this. It could just be for optimization's sake or what have you, but there is still potential for this to be used in more unconventional ways, and the fact that Toby's working on a more official, proper system for it is really making me wonder just what the hell is in store for the future if each chapter is basically being treated like its own game. As far as I know, that's not usually how it really goes with coding for different chapters. I imagine it's more so like they're all contained within the bigger bubble or concept that is the game you're making, so the fact—
This is a really random question. I've just been thinking about it for a while. I'm pretty sure Andrew Cunningham is involved with the process of making Homestuck, if I'm not mistaken. Homestuck fans, holy shit, it's been mentioned. But I'm pretty sure they're friends, Toby and I believe it's Andrew Cunningham. I know he's friends with the creator of Homestuck, and I'm pretty sure Andrew Cunningham is the creator of Homestuck. So I'm putting that link together. If not, fucking kill me, lynch me, burn me at the stake. I'm sorry, that's just going off the information I know. If you were friends with Toby, would you be like, hey, where's gaster? Who's the knight? Or would you like patiently wait for each chapter release? Or would you I feel like I would just be like, hey, when's chapter 5? Just so I can plan stuff around it. That's the extent of where I would go. But I don't know, I'm curious
if you would deliberately self-containing. Every chapter within its own bubble is incredibly fascinating to me.
I'm just shameless.
Again, very last minute, but I just knew I had to mention this in part 2 as soon as I learned about it. It could very well strengthen my theory even more than I think it already has been over the months. Moving on, let's actually take a look at what Chapter 2 might have to offer us in regards to Deltarune's meta-narrative. Right away, the save menu for Chapter 2 pre-completion is different as it doesn't have the same ominous ambience anymore of Chapter 1's pre-completion menu. Instead, having the same narrator as the post-completion menu, a background of the Great Door, and playing Faint Glow. You can carry over your save files from Chapter 1, or more specifically, the game's completion files, which are created upon completing a chapter in the respective slot. But the interesting thing is that you don't need to do this at all. You can just start a completely new save file without having played Chapter 1 whatsoever, and this is the only instance of Gaster actually showing up in the save menu in the form of the name selection. From what I can gather, this functions the same way as it did in the Goner Maker's save for the lack of creating or naming a vessel. However, I do want to mention something
I did not know that was a
about
feature
the vessel,
at all.
specifically if you play Chapter 2 on a save file without transferring from Chapter 1. Normally, if you go into the configuration file, or basically just the code for your save file, you'll notice that the first line contains your player or creator name, but the second line contains the name that you gave your vessel. This is already pretty intriguing to me, as the fact that it's one of the first things that the save file records and that it's still stored does tell me that it could have some importance or use still. Albeit, it might just be because the variable had to be set to that given the opportunity, and you can't truly discard or unset a variable, if you get what I mean. This is what you'd see on most save files, as I assume a lot of people simply transfer their Chapter 1 save to Chapter 2. But on a completely clean Chapter 2 file, while you can't get to name the vessel, and so because of that the vessel's name wouldn't show up on the file, the game does automatically pick out the prompts for the vessel that you'd normally pick if you did the Goner Maker. So if you let the game pick these choices by itself, it just picks the first option of every single prompt except for It's a Gift, where the game picks Mind. Which I would have said that this implies the vessel will have some relevance later, or that its gift carries a relevance of its own, and not to say that it won't because we really have no idea, but I've come to learn that this is because of some coding shenanigans that I think I need to explain real quick. Usually, when you're making a variable for the purpose of storing a choice that the player makes, your index, or rather your starting number, is 0. So, for instance, this prompt here in the Goner Maker, the first option would have a variable number of 0, then 1, then 2, and so on. This specific prompt, however, that stores what gift you want for the vessel is saved as an index of 1, which means that what's really going on with the variables is that it goes from 1 to 0 to -1 and so on. And what do you know, because all of the options that are picked on a fresh Chapter 2 save are with the variable number of 0, the option that gets picked here is not the first one, but the second one, which is Mind. So really, it should be the first option, but because of how this prompt was coded, I'm not actually sure if it was intentionally meant to be
I don't get this at all, to be honest with you.
Toby, you're very cool and
I
awesome.
know I'm brown, but I'm not that brown that I not code.
Worries me. Just a little bit. In fact, funnily enough, my other point about the Goner Maker now also has to be corrected, as it's another instance of the game's non-Euclidean coding. So first, let me just establish how this game's saving system works real quick, and Undertale's by extension. If you open up any of your save files, you'll see that what your game keeps track of are all of these numbers and the occasional strings and booleans and whatever, each one being in their own line, or rather flag, that the game looks at and registers as your data. So my original belief about the flags or variables that deal with the choices you pick in the Goner Maker was that all the flags are in the order that the prompts were presented in. As in, from flag 1217, the choice for which head you picked for the vessel, to flag 1226, which I thought was the pain and seizure question, I originally thought that these flags were arranged in such a way that you could go from top to bottom in the same order that the game presents these choices. This is wrong, and originally I was going to assume that because flag 1224, which I assumed was for how you felt about the vessel, was always at 0, that it meant that this flag would always be set to 0 no matter what you picked, effectively nullifying it, since Gaster says that the vessel will not hear whatever response you pick. And that flags 1225 and 1226 were the last two questions, which are the pain and seizure one and the have you answered honestly question. What I've now learned is that flag 1226 is actually for the prompt that handles which gift you want for the vessel, and flag 1223 stores the choice for how you feel about the vessel. As you can tell, I picked kindness, and this is the prompt which has an index of 1, so kindness would be the first option, setting this flag to 1. And flag 1223 is also set to 1, which would be hope, as that is the second option in that prompt. Where the pain and seizure and have you answered honestly flags actually are in flags 1224 and 1225. As you can see on this save file and the playthrough of the game I recorded, I picked yes for these two questions, setting these to 0, as most players probably would. But I tested this by starting a new save and instead picking no for these questions. And what do you know, these two flags are now set to 1 on the new save. So there's that. I feel kind of dumb that I didn't catch on to this sooner, but then again, these things happen when it comes to figuring out Undertale or Deltarune's code, and I imagine with Chapter 2's release, whatever new flags it added ended up shifting stuff around.
I don't know.
But regardless, I just wanted to prevent any potential misinformation. Thanks to Half-Bred Chaos for letting me know about this.
Half-Bred Chaos.
All of the analysis. And in fact, I guess this is where I'm going to be yet again rambling about the save system in Deltarune, because there's been some changes made to how it works in Chapter 2, and there's another thing about it that completely baffles me. So let me start with the UI change made to it this time around. In Chapter 1, save points functioned identically to Undertale pretty much. You hit a point, it shows you the one save file you're playing on, you save, and boom, you're done. It only ever shows you the one save slot that you picked from the menu, and you can't save to another slot from the current one while in-game. Chapter 2 changes this, as now, whenever you interact with the save point, you are not only given more options, such as storage and recruits, but when you save, you can do so to any of the 3 save slots from pretty much any point. Even in this demo, Chapter 1's save system is unmodified, so it's definitely an intentional changement for Chapter 2 and onward specifically. And presentation-wise, I just find it kind of weird, but knowing that Toby wanted Chapter 1 to be people's expectations of the game being thrown out the window, I guess it makes sense. But this is where Sham and the Shadow Crystals come in again for a moment. When you go to Castletown for the first time in this chapter...
What was that 3D animation of Sham? That is so cool. I need that as a GIF on Discord ASAP.
And if you've defeated Jevil and have a Shadow Crystal from a completed Chapter 1 save file, Sham will take note of it and take it off your hands, being surprised at the thought that Jevil even had one, which implies that they've known about them for a while, weirdly enough. They go on to say that they get the feeling you'll find more of them if you continue to fight the secret bosses of each chapter, and that if you can get your hands on more of them, then Sham can make something incredible for you. However, here's the weird part about this. Even if you have beaten Jevil on a different save file and started Chapter 2 completely clean, Sham still remembers your fight with Jevil. In fact, as long as you have beaten a secret boss at all, if you go left of Castletown and interact with this opening, you'll get the appropriate weapon or armor from the previous chapter's secret boss, as well as their Shadow Crystal. As far as I know, this is the only instance of a boss fight or encounter being permanent across save files, including ones where that shouldn't be the case, and Sham plays into this by asking...
Devil's Knife as a weapon scales, it's not like an endgame weapon, right? Like, it's only good for like a couple chapters and you get better, because you get stronger and stronger each chapter, right? Like, Devil's Knife can't be as good as like the sword you get after beating the Black, or you get to beat the Black Knight, or like the axe you get for from Gerson. You know what I mean? I don't know.
A lot in their dialogue in this chapter.
I don't know.
You defeated that clown last time, didn't you?
I don't know.
Maybe you just hadn't remembered it
I
yet?
guess.
Are you sure that you haven't fought him? They ask these questions as if this is something the Fun Gang or even the player has already done before and we just don't remember it, yet Sham does. This isn't even taking into account the fact that Sham just somehow knows about Spamton and refers to him as that salesman, but I'll get there soon enough. Point is, not only do we now have proof of the game being able to change its contents depending on what slot you're playing on, but now there's ample opportunity for certain actions to be permanent no matter if you are playing on a completely clean save or a transferred one. There's one more thing I'd like to note as well relating to stats actually. You'll notice that in Chapter 2, in the Dark World, the party is at level 2 thanks to sealing the fountain in Chapter 1. Internally, what I find very curious is that this is referred to as false LV, as your level in the Dark World is entirely separate from your LV in the Light World.
Right.
In fact, love is displayed as its own stat in the configuration file compared to level, and your love does not go up in either chapter from LV1 no matter what route you do.
Guys, I just want you to know I love you.
Account, I guess
well, that's actually how you build parasocial relations. Like, I think you're awesome. I am your friend, but I don't know.
Finally move on from here and on to...
I have the same microphone.
It's at this point that I think it'd be appropriate to bring up another character in the game so far that I think knows way too much about the nature of Deltarune meta-wise. Ralze. Because as far as I know, there is not a single other character, aside from Gaster technically, and this specific Rudin that ever utters the player's name. While it's made out to be sort of a random thing to shrug off, it's certain really fucking weird that this is the only time it's ever mentioned, and there are no means we know of that would explain how anyone would know about our name to even begin with. The only clue
wait a second. I only just got the significance of that. Oh shit. Wait, how does Ralsei know?
Get is, or so I heard it's called, after the stated name of the town, implying they heard it from someone else.
Wait, I feel like Well, I feel so
How
slow.
does this lead
Sorry,
into Russell,
I'm
you
locked
might
in. I'm locked
ask?
in. I'm locked
Well,
in.
if it weren't for the worrying amount of accommodation for his knowledge that we are controlling Chris, I wouldn't be batting an eye at him, but there's a lot of instances of things that, while they could be explained by just simple player convenience and trying to get people used to playing the game, part of me can't help but think that his role of being the game's tutorial and hint guy maybe should have more attention called to it. There's already the fact that he does the tutorial for you, where he explains how to handle fights in the game down to what buttons to press and what UI elements to pay attention to. But there's other instances, like this one box puzzle in the field where Rousey tells you, press the boxes onto the switches with Z. Before Susie is like, wait, Rousey, what the fuck are you talking about? Who is Z? Which you only get out of her once, by the way. After that, she just says that you could use your hands. Or why not this other instance in Chapter 2 where you're in the trash zone and as you're about to leave, Rousey gives you a reminder about your storage and about sparing enemies to recruit them. Where again, Susie is just like, whoa, that sounds pretty important. But, and this might just be my interpretation, but I feel like this response gives an aura of, man, those sure were words you just said. Like, I don't know what that means, but sure, noted. And of course, there's the fact that Rousey knows the layout of the school, which isn't inherently weird because Queen seems to also be aware of the Dark World being confined in the lab, but he then tells Chris to go to the old classroom to the east of the closet doors as if Chris doesn't remember the layout of the school that they've been going to for who knows how many years. Which, again, this is just my interpretation, maybe I'm asking a lot of Chris because they have enough on their plate as is, but these are very specific instructions to give to someone who has seen Hometown much more than the player has. And there's just a reminder from Rousey again when you're in Castletown after sealing the second fountain about saving, and I just want to call attention to this dialogue because I find it so fucking weird. He refers to Chris in this instance about saving and taking a break anytime you want, but this doesn't make any sense to Chris necessarily. Saving as a concept is still a very new thing to them as far as we know. Their save file from when you interact with the save point for the first time certainly suggests this, and Chris doesn't have the ability to just hop out of the Deltarune experience at any point. They exist within that world and they've been doing so well before we came into the picture. The only character, so to speak, who would possibly need to save to take a break right now and would be familiar with this concept is the player. Again, there is a very fair chance that some of these interactions—
Is Rousey a bad guy? Wait a second, how do they have all this information? I trusted them.
do serve a sole purpose of just trying to be convenient to the player, but with what kind of meta fuckery these games have been capable of in the past, are you really gonna tell me that Toby wouldn't make the idea of video game hints and reminders diegetic? Or rather that it would just be completely off the table no matter what? The way I see it, the seeds for it are already there. I think there's ample evidence to suggest that when Rousey says Chris most of the time on screen, he's really referring to you. And Susie's confusion at some of the things he says would definitely add fuel to this, as Susie only knows Chris, she doesn't know that you're controlling them. And I'm not ruling out the possibility that this could all be a giant joke and for the funny, but it's still dialogue that was added to the game. And knowing how this sort of thing goes, everything in Deltarune is either for a giant gag, is there to be poking at a massive plot and lore reveal, or is both somehow. And I haven't even mentioned the fact that Rousey in both chapters has been able to shift the perspective of the player away from Chris and has used that diversion to his advantage by talking to Chris off screen. Or the fact that after beating the optional boss of chapter 2 that requires going off the beaten path, Rousey does his best to shrug off what happened, because he most definitely knows things that he'd rather not discuss so early on in the journey. Or the fact that on a weird route you completely lose the chance to see the interaction between Susie and Noelle alone, and the Ferris wheel sequence doesn't even happen, which leaves Rousey genuinely confused and quick to ask Susie what happened as if things have gone completely off script for him. I guess my point being, while characters like Jevil and Spamton definitely are more aware of the nature of Deltarune's world in a meta sense, there's just something about Rousey. Not only does he seem to be aware of how the game works on the player's end, but he's actively concerned about the player experience of the game and his control over what the player actually sees, at least on normal routes. And his manner of being very specific with his instructions in a way that would only make sense to the player and is pointed out to be very fucking weird to people around him doesn't feel like something that I can just ignore. And I think when you take into account how many features are actually added and tweaked between chapters, such as the recruit system, or the introduction to elements or storage, and Rousey giving reminders about how most of these systems work, I feel like it can't be completely baseless on my part why I feel this way about him in this regard. Of course, I can't say this is fully exclusive to Rousey because there's instances like the Masters in the Chapter 1 field, who do mention things like tension points and HP and battle mechanics in general in a similarly specific way, and that bit in Chapter 2 where an enemy has to explain to Noelle how the combat works, to which she does draw an interesting comparison to Dragon Blazers, and that is another rabbit hole of its own.
Dragon
But there's at least a
Blazers.
consistency in that the battle system seems to be a thing that Darkners in general have a self-awareness of, but I feel that does not explain why Rousey is so specific about what direction to go in the light world, or saving and all the different features that come with it, or pressing Z next to the box to move it. This is certainly more on the reaching end of my interpretations of the game, but it feels like a necessary thing to account for when the developer of the game has very much used mechanics like these as important plot points in the past. I could be dead wrong, but I'm just saying it's incredibly weird, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's
Is
something more to it.
Rose Flowey? Oh, don't. I know, Flowey
But,
is real.
yeah, I'll get back to all the weird
As
shit
we all
about
know,
Rousey later
Ezreal
on when I
is
get to talk more about my
the
theory
roaring
and put
knight.
everything together in my own way, but there's still plenty of other things I need to cover about Chapter 2, so let's just continue with something a little simpler. Let's talk about the egg again. In Chapter 2, the egg makes another appearance, this time in the Cyber City. In fact, even the man that gives you the egg makes 2 appearances in this chapter, depending on if you got the egg from the last chapter. If you did, and if you interact with one of the cars in the traffic jam outside the library, you'll see a man waving at you. And moving on to Cyber City, in the room where you have 2 roads separated by
Oh,
some
I didn't know
switches,
that.
if you stop the cars on both roads and manage to run to the bottom of the first road, you'll see the second road actually extends further down. And going down here before you get run over, you'll find yourself in an alleyway with the only knockable door in Cyber City, and also a Toby Fox jump scare. Fake game over included. You then find yourself back in the alleyway with a dumpster, some moss, and graffiti of one of the trees from the Scarlet Forest. Interacting with it, you get flavor text hinting that you can do what you did last chapter and walk between this room and the other room to eventually load into the next secret area, with Chris alone again like last time.
I have a question for you guys. And I was thinking about this when I woke up today. Because I need to I'm currently doing a weird route playthrough, you know. But which I'm slacking on. I know. I will play more of it soon, don't worry. But I'm currently just wondering, well, I was just wondering, how many people, what percentage of people do you think did the weird route first naturally? They just stumbled across it and they're like, yeah, sure, let's do this weird route. Well, I know it wasn't called the weird route for them, it was just a route, but you know what I mean? Like,
you go
who's
out of
like,
bounds beyond the blue
I don't know,
road and you
I'm
see
just-
another tree, which going behind it, you meet the man once
what do you-
again, who may be happy to see you. You
I
get the
don't know what
choice
this bit
again to
is, I don't
accept
know
his
why I
offering
keep
of the
doing
egg, and if you do, you'll have the second egg of the game, which functions identically to how it did in Chapter 1. When you get to explore the light world again, you'll find that interacting with the egg that Temmie has in class actually tells you how many eggs you've collected thus far, and going to Santa's shop, you can put the second egg into the basket of them, to which Susie just asks if you reverse stole an egg. Just make sure to interact with that first and not with anything else up here in the shop, because apparently interacting with other stuff here before the basket also triggers the flag of you placing the egg and you'll miss out on the basket interaction. This definitely seems to be a bug, but as of now it still hasn't been patched, so there's that. But that's the extent to any egg-related activities in Chapter 2, and of course we still have no idea just what it's building up to.
I know you could put one there and one in
weirdly enough, you
Haskell's
can't actually get
fridge.
this egg on a weird route.
And you
The
get
method
3
to
more
doing so
eggs.
is completely locked off. So whatever the eggs could be building up to, it looks like you can't really see that for yourself if you're, freezing your chicken. Now we can talk about...
This next segment is gonna be discussing spamton, how it's a very strong flashing lights warning. Okay, hopefully you guys don't. That's the time. The next 30 seconds, if you need to. I won't pause it, so. Just. Oh. Yeah.
Now we can talk about... We can talk
What have I done?
If you thought Jevil and Sham or Rousey were full of metafuckery and constant fourth wall breaks that made you feel like your brain was about to explode from all the questions they end up adding to the lore of the game, Spamton is like the elephant's foot for such things. Just a few minutes around this disgusting little man and you're gone before you even know it. I don't even know where to begin, honestly, but let's just start from when you first encounter him and work from there. In Cyber City, when the car is stopped in the traffic jam and you have to go to the other side of the road to clear it, you're stopped in the middle of this alleyway and the only mandatory sequence involving Spamton in Chapter 2, assuming you're not doing the weird route. This has been pointed out before, but if there's anything to get out of Spamton immediately is that Spamton is on the other end of a spectrum of sorts where Jevil was on one end. With Jevil, you had to go out of your way to look for him, and when you did find him, he's more invitational in his mannerisms. Whereas Spamton makes himself known the first chance he gets, even if you don't fully go through with his deals, you do have to fight him at least once. And you see, another thing about Spamton that makes him so fucking hard to read sometimes is just his way of speaking. While Jevil at least could be understood in hindsight as he uses a lot of metaphors and imagery through his wording to convey what he's getting at, there are just some things Spamton says that are obfuscated or have a random thing thrown in to substitute whatever he's actually trying to say, so a lot of analyzing Spamton comes down to filling in the blanks that these bracketed phrases end up making. So everything I am going to say about his dialogue is just the best assumption I could possibly make from looking at what he says, and also after looking at many theory videos that have already done plenty of analysis on this character, from the thematic importance that he carries to his relation to other secret bosses.
I don't be that. I think Spamton is the most influential, not the most influential, but like in terms of in the Deltarune community. And okay, Sans is Sans, you know what I mean? He's freaking Sans Undertale. But in terms of Deltarune, I would say Spamton's the guy, you know what I mean? Like, Spamton's pretty huge. I don't know. I'm curious. Do you think which is the fan favorite character that everyone knows who's played Deltarune is my question.
This is to why he is Cat. So moving on. He makes himself known after coming out of his dumpster home and notices Chris, which is pretty big news to Spamton as he knows that Chris is a Lightner and therefore has a heart-shaped object, or a soul. And in one of many moments in this chapter where Chris does act more on their own, they seem genuinely kind of freaked out at the sight of this dude. Spamton, seeing himself and Chris at this moment with them being alone and being rather spot on with the idea of them having lost control of their life, possibly alluding to the soul overriding the control of Chris has over themselves, proposes a deal to them and implies that he knows a way that him and Chris can change that fate, that being a certain hyperlink block to end becoming big shots. And for this to happen, all Chris has to do is just show him their soul. And this is where the first fight with Spamton happens. We get a little glimpse of Spamton's past in this fight as he says that he used to already be a big shot, but that now he needs a bit of generosity. And the fight comes down to pretty much taking Spamton's deal and negotiating with him in various ways. Once you reach full mercy with him, the fight ends and he tells you to meet him back at the trash zone and to visit his shop alone. Which, if you do want to see his deal through, is where you go next. And alright, I want to just take a moment to talk about this room, and specifically this door. Does nobody find this fucking strange? There's a great door in the middle of this room just sticking out from all the garbage, and when you enter it, you see a wall behind Spamton that has no business being there, and a phone to the right just sort of sitting there in the darkness, ringing at a specific point in the song that's playing. It's not really something that I can get much out of, and the weird glitchiness of this shop lines up a bit with the messed up tiles that you see throughout Cyber City, and especially in the trash zone, but it's just... I mean, look at this. What am I even supposed to say? Like, I remember when I first played this chapter over a year ago, and the sheer confusion that I felt when I saw this shop for the first time has not really changed one bit. As much as I try to make sense of the things going on in this game, I think with Spamton you just kinda have to go with it at this point. But the next important thing to touch on is his dialogue when you're talking with him in the shop. When you select Our Deal, he lays out the plan for what he wants you to do. Go into the basement in the Queen's mansion and find something in there, particularly an empty disk that will make both him and Chris big, using the keygen that you buy from him to get past the encryption. When you select About You, he goes more into his past of how he used to be the email guy before becoming big, and also actually alluding to Jevil as that damned clown around town as he wants to surpass him and reach for the big one. So not only is there an established history between him and Jevil, but in regards to what the big one might be referring to, it could be in reference to the Neo body or just a higher level of power closer to...
I got a dumb question. How have they interacted if Spamton's like... don't they have to interact in the light world? Like, how is Jevil interacting with Spamton? You know, it's a spam email, one's a Joker card. I don't get how darkeners interact with each other, if that makes sense. Could someone... I don't know.
To that of a Lightner, or perhaps something even more powerful? Again, just my best assumptions. But it's when you select Knight that things get especially fucking weird. He actually alludes to knowing something about the Knight before getting cut off and apologizing to something off-screen, which could be the Knight or something that probably just stopped him from revealing things that he shouldn't, before uttering probably my favorite fucking line in this entire game so far. But you'll only get to select this option once, as after you do, it's replaced with the Friends option. And selecting that, you get spamton assuring Chris that they already are friends and that they don't need anything. No easels, no CRTs, no...
Mike.
Before cutting himself off and telling Chris to not believe anything they see on TV. Very likely foreshadowing for Chapter 3's main antagonist, but that's a whole other can of worms, although it does continue the trend that Jevel said in Chapter 1 of foreshadowing the next chapter's antagonist. Just much more directly this time around. And finally, selecting Fear, we get the most bizarre outcome. Spamton assures that there's nothing to be afraid of except...
Is my PC okay? No.
Well, he gets cut off as a voice suddenly starts crying for help, asking if anyone can hear them. Before Spamton comes to again and says that they didn't hear anything, but it sounded like they were talking to you. And while there's not much in the way of confirming this completely, this does line up very closely with the unused script from Chapter 1, and if these two things are to be connected, then it certainly makes me wonder how much more the supposedly unused script is going to bleed into the actual game. In fact, in the Japanese translation of this line, it apparently literally does just quote the Japanese translation of unused, so there's that, I suppose.
Fun fact, someone told me in the comments, okay, when I ever give a fact in this video about Deltarune, it is stuff I've got from videos or the comments, so don't quote me on it. But I'm quoting you guys, so I trust you. Someone told me that Toby is fluent in Japanese and does all the translation himself and takes a lot of time in making sure that each kanji is precise, because kanji can be misread or there's different versions of it, so that's why there is a Japanese translation for Undertale and Deltarune, which I thought was super interesting.
Which, speaking of,
Boom.
This is one of only two things I really need
Truth
to mention
nuke.
about the game internally in Chapter 2, but the unused script is updated in this chapter, now having a new set of text for each variable. This time it continues from Chapter 1's version of the script, as the voice assumes that nobody can really hear them. In fact, they're not really sure if they can hear themselves because of how dark and quiet it is, yet they swear that sometimes they can hear what they best describe as...
As what?
some sort of scratching.
Ah.
But that's all we can get from this version of the script, and as of now, that is the extent to what we know about the character that is speaking all of this dialogue in this function. It's still really anyone's guess what's going on with this unknown character or what that scratching noise could even be. But for the moment, that's where the unused script ends, so let's just continue on. You eventually get the Queen's mansion and to the room with the encryption.
No
you use the
way.
keygen to unlock it, and
That's
just like
such
the
a cool
Spamton shop,
statue.
Chris, on their own accord, tells the others to stay
wish I
behind
could
and let
3D
Chris go
print
on
that.
their own to the basement. And I still can't get over just how fucking bizarre this area is. Even after my first and second playthrough of this chapter, it's such a tonal whiplash. Completely empty halls, several rooms with mostly empty chests, these weird things that jump at you and also stare at you if you're idle for long enough, which is weird enough on its own already, and whatever the fuck this is.
Friend?
So, if you go in this room where the
Wait a
teacup ride for
second.
the basement is, if you run to the end of the room, then to the other end, and back before the ride makes its way up, you'll see this face appear for a brief moment. This was the sole exception to my theory that every all-caps thing in the files was related to just stuff in the menus, as internally, the sprite of the smile is called image friend, and the corresponding object is device friend. Its only function as an object is to appear, gradually lessen in opacity, and then disappear, and there's nothing else regarding its function in the code. Aside from every other file that uses all caps, this is the only one that you can actually encounter in the playable game beyond Goner Maker or the menus. So, what or who the hell is this?
John
With the
Roots?
context of just Chapter 2, we have absolutely no fucking clue. It could be Spamton, it's probably not, but it could be. It could be the supposed Mike character that Spamton was alluding to. It could be whatever the next secret boss is, if it's not Mike, or maybe it's even just Gaster himself, who fucking knows? But if looking at it solely from a meta perspective, maybe this makes more sense to fit in this group of all caps files than it might initially seem? When you think about it, this object is still out of bounds, it's unreachable, and its only purpose realistically is to just fuck with the player and catch them off guard. Hell, naming it friend probably plays into that. While it could be referencing that this is someone that Spamton or some other character knows, there's no way it's not named that for the purpose of just freaking people out more, referring to this as a friend in a very ominous way. I do have some other ideas as well for how this fits into the whole meta side of things, but I think I'll save that for just a bit later. But that is actually all the all caps files that I could find in the game, though we still have quite a bit to go over in Chapter 2, so let's keep
really
going.
hope Chapter
You
3
shut down
and
the
4 is
force
in Part
field,
3.
go through this nightmare which I managed to survive first try in this playthrough because I am so good at video games,
Jesus
and after going through a
Christ.
very ominous railroad, you find yourself in a room with many empty openings, save for the very last one which bears some resemblance to Mettaton Neo's body, and this is where you get the empty disc. You can also talk to Swatch after getting the disc to ask about the basement, to which he just fucking gaslights you. But you go back to Spamton's shop with the disc, which is where he gives you the next step in his plan. Give the disc to him so that he can transfer his hyperlink blocked, which in this case, and for a good portion of mentions of hyperlink blocked, I want to say refers to control or something related to it that would be spoiling something if said hyperlink was not blocked. Once you go through with the transfer, he then wants you to go back to the basement and put the disc back where you found it. He does warn you, however, that doing the transfer will close his shop permanently, which makes sense since if you do the transfer then... Oh.
Don't like that.
The screen always freaked me out. It's so subtle, but the thing is, it's not like this only happens immediately after transferring, but you can still go back to the shop after this and it's just empty. Like, there's no reason why I should be able to come back to see the screen again, yet it feels like this reminder of what you did in a way. That, and it does line up a little bit more visually with the gray doors, so perhaps this is how this place looked like before Spamton set up shop here? I'm not really sure.
I feel like the door would change color then,
especially on a first playthrough.
You know what I
Moving
mean?
on, you do as Spamton says, and you put the disc back in the Neo body in the basement, and... nothing happens.
Oh, nice, okay.
That is, until you go about halfway back through the room with the tracks, as Spamton Neo comes to life. He's happy with this newfound power, yet he still notices these strings holding him back, realizing this body still isn't strong enough to make him truly free. And this is when he turns to Chris to try to take their soul from them in an attempt to get even more power, to which, while Chris seems
Not
a bit
cool, man.
disoriented, they don't make an effort to really stop him or go into any defensive stance, weirdly enough. Spamton is stopped by Rousey and Susie, and then cue the Spamton Neo fight, where we get the first instance in Deltarune of the soul's color changing, in this case to yellow, being a parallel to Mettaton's fights in Undertale. Generally, I can't get too much about the fight other than some particular bits of dialogue that do stick out. There's at least another potential allusion to the next main antagonist with the mention of Cathode screams, Mike is mentioned again, Spamton directly mentions heaven, and he makes a lot of effort to try to get Chris to hand their soul over politely, but particularly asking if they want to be a heart on a chain their whole life rather than what is, at least in Spamton's eyes, becoming bigger and closer to freedom. Now, whether you attack him or spare him, the outcome after the fight stays the same, but the things that happen at the end of the fight do change. When you attack him, he scolds you for thinking that depleting his HP would do the trick and tries to transform into Spamton X before just fucking going kaboom.
Combusting.
But the much more unsettling option
Combustion,
comes from
man.
sparing him. If you decide to cut all of his strings down to the very last one keeping him up, he takes it as you actually trying to gift him his freedom despite the threat of killing them just earlier. He finally realizes that success comes from not just determination, but the power of friendship, and gets ready for his last string to be cut before...
Dude, it's so eerie and creepy. I hate that animation a lot.
The game then cuts back to a much more resigned Spamton, realizing he really has done everything he could, even if it didn't work out, and figures that if he's done his part, then he can at least be of use to the Fun Gang, and you get whatever item you get from him depending on how you did the fight, and his Shadow Crystal. This Shadow Crystal, when used in the cyber world, shows a brief glimpse of the computer lab, similar to how the first one briefly showed the unused classroom. And in the light world, as a shard of glass, using it shows a glimpse of Susie glaring coldly at Chris through the glass, when in reality she's smiling and just flipping them off or something. Shortly after, though, when the Fun Gang is about to leave the basement for good, Susie stops and she has a moment of just genuinely wondering what the fuck just happened. Rousey tries to shrug it off as just corrupted data that shouldn't be given too much thought, and Susie notices Chris's expression and asks if they're doing alright. And this is one of the most
happens if you
standout
say
examples
no?
of the potential dissonance between Chris and the player, as you can say yes, but Susie will feel like Chris doesn't really mean it if you pick this option, with Rase simply passing it off as Chris not wanting the group to worry about them. But picking no will have Chris yell, which would be a first thus far in the game for them, and Rase tries to comfort them to get their mind off of it. It goes without saying, there is a lot of discussion about what people think Chris really feels in regards to Spamton. Even by Chapter 2's standards, I can't say Chris really acts on their own as much as they do in any scenes that involve Spamton, and it could be boiled down to a lot of things. We know Chris has a tendency to obey random requests, like there's this interaction with Bradley in Chapter 1 where she recounts on how Chris just got her, Asriel, and other friends of theirs a bunch of food just because they were asked to, so it could be just common courtesy, despite them also having a tendency to be a bit of a silly trickster from time to time. But there's also the interpretation that Chris really did see Spamton as a friend, or at least saw a lot of themselves in him, like he saw a lot of himself in Chris, which would line up especially well with the outcome for sparing him, as there's definitely a sort of parallel to draw between the strings that were holding Spamton back and the whole situation with us being the metaphorical strings holding Chris back. A sort of reminder that even if they were to cut those strings for good, that it wouldn't be sustainable for them. Especially when you consider the weight that the soul is given with it having the fate of the world and what have you. I'd say there also might be a third interpretation, and that's... I don't know, maybe Chris is actually just kind of scared of Spamton in general? Like, they don't look comfortable around him. They often walk back a few steps, they don't bother to defend themselves when their soul is about to get taken from them, which would be a sign of them being okay with the idea of it, or them just being genuinely in terror. And even in Spamton's shop, the option for leaving is just called escape. It might lead into them being afraid of becoming Spamton as well, that they don't want to become that desperate, and that they do see themselves in him, but not in a good way, or one that would really warrant them seeing him as a friend, but more like a cautionary tale. There's a lot of ways to look at it, and this dynamic between Spamton and Chris is one of the reasons why there's just so much fucking depth to Spamton as a character, as he by far has some of the strongest impact we've seen on Chris, and I think it's definitely worth mentioning because if a secret boss can leave that kind of impact on our main character here, and knowing the kind of information that secret bosses appear to have access to, it does seem relevant to understanding the game from a meta perspective as well. But I can't say for sure. Either way, god, that's finally everything about Spamton, at least for when he is actively present in Chapter 2. Save for Weird Route, but I'll get there. While Spamton never outright mentions anything that's very meta, like how Jevil casually referred to HP before his fight, I do think there's definitely a lot of stuff that does show he knows more than most other characters do about Deltarune's nature. He knows of Jevil, he's directly hinted at the next main antagonist, and at this Mike character that we don't know much about other than Mike being a former close associate of Spamton's. He's had a different character likely speak through him, and this is most commonly believed to be the character from the Unused Strings, and his goal pretty much was to reach a level of power that ultimately...
How the hell did Death speak through Spamton? It makes no sense. I need to know. It's really bugging me now. How? But like, if you think about it, how? Please. Who knows? Toby, explain. I need to know.
Would have required the soul, or our control, in order to achieve that. While not so direct, I think the idea of a character trying to literally be you and reach your level of control is pretty fucking significant, and with the motif of control going very much without saying at this point, it does still continue the trend of these secret bosses knowing a little more about how things really work compared to other characters. I guess there's also something to be said about the fact that he's a secret boss that also is a shopkeeper, given that Undertale has placed emphasis on a character like Gerson being immune to the player by sheer virtue of being a shopkeeper, and again, the whatever this is that happens when you have Spamton transferred to the disc.
Before Chapter 4.
Maybe there's something of note about that.
Whoa.
But really, it's a lot easier to look into his dialogue in the context of lore and in relation to characters like Chris, Noel, or Des, while Jevil was a bit more blatant about his understanding that he was in a game, and that knowledge making him feel like the only free one. Although, the thing with Jevil is that he's alluded to the theme of your choices not mattering. Like, if you refuse to do something with him, he says, how could you refuse a game that you're already playing, and stuff of that sort. He gives off the impression that while he knows he's in a fabricated reality, he can indulge in that and let himself be free, just enjoying whatever weird, fucked up ride the world has in store for him. Spamton, obviously, is not like this. His whole thing was just to gain more and more power to reach beyond heaven and reach a level of control alike to, or even exceeding ours. If absolutely anything, I think the closest I can get to finding an equivalent for him breaking the fourth wall outright like Jevil did with mentioning HP is actually in the fact that he's so blatantly aware of the soul and what it's capable of. There isn't another boss in the game that really focuses on it quite like Spamton does, and on top of that, the way he manipulates the presentation of the battle system also really adds on to that. There's also the fact that the soul color changes, which I think on a meta level is pretty significant, because it does make me ask a lot of questions. For one thing, why only now? Why only in this fight, and why does this never happen anywhere else in the game?
Does it change
what conditions
at any other
have to
point
be
in the
met
game?
in order for the color of the soul to change? I've seen some theories about this that I was initially willing to believe, but I feel like more often than not they depend way too much on Undertale rather than thinking about Deltarune by itself. Not that Undertale has no weight in any of this, but consider. Every time the soul color changed in Undertale, it was often because of the boss you were fighting. When it turned to blue, that was Papyrus's attack. When it turned to green, that was Undyne's doing. When it turned to purple...
Wait. That's why I was thinking of purple. What did those colors mean? Because yellow's justice from, Undertale yellow. What does blue, green, and purple mean? Do they have significant meanings? Or is it just, I don't know, like...
Well, that was Muffet's doing.
You know what I
The
mean?
only sort of exception is when it turns yellow, since that was thanks to Alphys' help, but regardless, the soul color never changes on its own. It's always thanks to someone else, either for your benefit or to limit you in some way. And the theory I often hear in Deltarune's case is that because Spamton was using Mettaton Neo's body, that the soul remembered something about it, and that...
1 second, guys. Come on. Wanna shit in my lap? Sorry, I had to let my cat in. Hey, Luna. Wanna say hi? Luna will say hi eventually. She takes like a minute to jump
made
up.
it turn yellow by itself. But the thing is, if the soul is supposed to be the player, then I don't remember getting the input for it to turn yellow. It just did that on its own. I couldn't control that. So it leads me to maybe 2 guesses. The first one that I feel less inclined to believe, but still could be possible maybe, is that it relates to Chris and their understanding of souls. Well, we don't know too much about Chris. What I can say for certain is that they definitely do have a pretty decent grasp on how to keep us out of their business if they feel the need
Sorry.
to.
Okay, Luna, can you just jump up, please? Make your mind up. Stop circling me like a shark in the water, you little... Come here. This is Luna. Hi, guys. She's a little cutie patootie. I love her so much. Mwah. You can shit here, maybe? Would you like that? No, you want to sit on my lap. Okay. Make your mind up, you little goober. Okay. Sorry.
They
no
have
more
a very
cat
convenient bird
interruptions.
cage for that, and while I don't know why that cage would have been there well before the player came into the picture, it does tell me that they have had some awareness of the mechanics of souls in Deltarune's world well before our perceived beginning of the story. So perhaps, somewhere in all of that research that Chris has done on them, there is something that relates to the color of the soul being able to change in certain situations. But, as you can tell, that required me to do a bit more reaching. So, the other interpretation that I felt more confident in honestly ended up being pretty simple. 2 words.
Divine
Divine
intervention.
intervention. And I know this is gonna sound kind of ridiculous, but hear me out.
Okay.
Spamton is one of the few characters in the game who has a pretty strong connection to Gaster. We also literally have a connection to Gaster that was made at the beginning of the game, and he is overseeing our behaviors both in-game and even in the menus. He gives us the prompt to either continue or give up whenever we get a game over, so clearly whenever we lose any battle or our HP in general, he is the one that has to handle that situation when it pops up. Now, to not get too ahead of myself, as I haven't summarized Spamton's backstory yet, we do know that he has likely been in communication with Gaster, but that communication was ceased at some point. And to not go too deep into theory chaos yet, all that I know I can say with complete certainty is that Gaster, as a rather powerful force in this game, plays a big role in why we even exist or can persist in Deltarune's world through the soul, which is integral to the game's battle system. And we know that Spamton's whole thing is that he does what he does because he's trying to become big again and to meet or even exceed the power of a lightner.
Wait, I just got reminded I probably should defend myself. I said before in the previous video that I think Gaster is the big bad was bad because I think that the average player isn't aware of who Gaster is. I would like to retract that statement. A lot of people made me aware of the fact that yes, they might not know specifically who Gaster is, but... Sorry, Luna, you little... Okay. There she goes. They might not know specifically who Gaster is, but they are aware of his presence because, you know, at the start of the game, they're like, this is being who speaks to us, and that's clearly Gaster, you know? But I don't know.
Through the acquisition of our soul.
I could see arguments for
So,
both.
what would a being with powers and a presence that is eldritch in nature do when he sees that one of his former associates is trying to break the order of things and could pose a threat to the player and by extension, the fate of the world? You stop everything for a moment and give the player an advantage and get them acquainted with it before letting them continue on. Yes, I know that basically saying that the soul changing partially because of Gaster sounds incredibly contrived, and honestly, I am ready for this theory to be completely steamrolled over. I try to be very careful with my references to him and what he might be involved in, because really you could say Gaster is involved with anything, and it might have the slightest basis to it because of how little we know about him. So I'm not going to say that this is a very strong or even remote...
I actually still think Gaster is the reason why when I message girls, they leave me undelivered for 3 weeks at a time, and why I've had no strong connection with one. But I don't know. I feel like it's a bit hearsay at this point. I just think that at this stage, Gaster is telling what people have crushes on that, hey, this guy, you shouldn't speak to him, and that's what it is. But I don't know. Maybe it's
interpretation. But it
that's
feels
just my
simple and
interpretation
relevant
these
enough
days.
to the circumstances of this specific fight that, unless we get any proper explanation for the soul-changing colors that is more detached from him, I can't really think of a better one at the moment. But I don't want to ignore this detail either, because given the emphasis placed on us being this soul, I think it's definitely important enough to give some time to. The only other possible lead we have about the soul color changing is that it only changed to yellow once spamton started using specifically blue attacks, which before that point and after that point have never appeared in any other fight. This could at least imply that maybe the soul was able to change on instinct upon seeing an obstacle that its normal mode wouldn't be able to overcome, so perhaps it is simply able to adapt to situations like that on the fly, but only when it deems itself necessary to, and that's why it never shows up in any other fight. But similarly, it could just be that if my divine intervention theory is somehow true, that Gaster saw spamton using those attacks, knew that it would be impossible to overcome normally, and decided to give the player the yellow soul advantage in response. I think it could go either way really, because we just barely know anything about how souls work in Deltarune specifically, or what conditions have to be met for the soul to change colors. But that's all I can really say on that for now.
I guess there's not enough
this finally
information
leads into
to
what you're
base
able to
go
learn
up
about
anything
spamton
else.
after his fight from Swatch and from the Addisons. Going back to Swatch, he gives some insight on the basement robot if you pick the appropriate option, stating that it was the embodiment of a Lightner's dream. Using Dark World logic, we can probably assume Swatch was basically a personified MS Paint, so we essentially learned that the robot was in fact a drawing of Metaton's ideal body that never really went anywhere, and it was left in the basement. Spamton learned about this, and knowing that it was made from a Lightner, tried to use it to fulfill his own goals. But it's when you return to the Trash Zone that you finally learn Spamton's backstory proper. He was a former Addison selling his own products much like the others, but for some reason they never really hit or went anywhere. Despite this, he showed great charisma, being sure that some way or another he'll make it big, and that is exactly what he did after enough desperation and making the right phone call. Or perhaps being called by the right person. Either way, he'd end up on the phone all the time, and that's when his products finally started to skyrocket. As a consequence, however, the Addisons felt that they were no longer needed and so stopped communicating with him. And eventually, that success would run out, even after moving into the Queen's mansion. Suddenly, the thing that was helping him just disappeared. He would start praying to that robot he found in the basement, trying everything he could to bring back that thing that made him successful, to no avail. And eventually, he was evicted and stripped of any renown that he might have had before. However, when one of the Addisons went to check on him on the day of his eviction, he wasn't there, save for a phone left hanging from what must have been the middle of a conversation. The Addison could still hear something on the other end, but when he put the receiver to his ear, he heard nothing but garbage noise. Which, as I mentioned much earlier in the series, is specifically what the flavor text describes the smile.ogg soundbite as in Chapter 2, when you use the cell phone in the Dark World. So, we have a common thread now. Both Spamton and Jevil have most likely come into contact with Gaster at some point. In Jevil's case, he ended up learning about the true nature of the world as a game, and in Spamton's case, he must have learned something similar, or at least was taught on how to exploit that to his benefit. But that exploit only worked for so long. And in the face of him being stuck in a world where he doesn't get a say in things, he didn't try to just go along with it like Jevil did, but he did everything he could to try to spite it. And for the normal route at least, that is everything I can really say about Spamton. He is yet another character made victim to knowledge beyond what he could handle, and we can say with decent certainty at the moment that Gaster played a part in that like he did with Jevil. We still can't really parse why though, or what he exactly did or said to either of them that would leave them in the state that they ended up being in, but it was enough to completely shift your perspective of the world in some way or another.
Skip 20 seconds if you don't want to get flashbanged. He doesn't know how to close the door properly. It pisses me off. Just freaking click. Sorry. Okay, now skip 20 seconds if you don't want to get flashbanged. I just got
And with
flashbanged.
that, the next thing I can talk about is what happens when you give the second Shadow Crystal to Sham, as I do find it worth noting. First off, they imply that they do actually know about Spamton, or at least are familiar with him, as they refer to him as that salesman, which would make sense, as we know at least that Jevil and Spamton know each other, so maybe Sham just knows of him by proxy. They make their own comment as well about the old machine being Mettaton's work, and then when talking to them after they take the second crystal, they tell you that the next secret boss might be impossible to win against without the Shadow Mantle, which Sham should have, but they seem to have had it taken from them. And they imply that if it stays that way, then at 2 Shadow Crystals they'll remain, which is worrying, but I'll give my thoughts on this later. That is pretty much everything to do with Shadow Crystals though, in Deltarune. There's only a few of them so far, and the common thread seems to be that in the Dark World they show a glimpse of where they would be in the Light World, while in there, as a glass shard, it shows an altered version of the Light World, and in both cases a rather grim alteration. And that would be everything in Chapter 2. That totally would be. But I've been holding off a very specific part of this chapter that I'm going to finally delve into now.
The weird route.
Deltarune's whole thing at the very beginning was that your choices did not matter. It did not matter in Chapter 1 how you approached fights, how you handled certain dialogue, what kind of vessel you made, what you did in the Light World, whether you fought Jevil. The game would end the same way ultimately, and the very most that would change is just the attitude of some of the people in the Dark World, but nothing outright horrible, just either, oh, we're nices now, or, oh, you're actually mean, get the fuck out of here. For a while, we were to assume that this would be the same case for Chapter 2. In the not short but not horribly long time frame where you only have Noelle with Chris, there is a way to actually kill enemies in the cyber world using her ice shock attack. Thanks to her lack of knowledge about how Dark Worlds work, or how the combat in general works, and through picking a few particularly manipulative dialogue choices that lead to her following what you say, under the impression that Chris just wants her to get stronger, your journey through the cyber world can very quickly turn into a bleak one with much more concerning consequences and implications than even the Light World. Culminating in Noelle killing Birdley using the attack that gives this alternate route its most common name, the Snowgrave route. For this video, I will be referring to it as the Weird Route, as I assume that this won't be the only chapter where this kind of thing can happen, and I believe that this is what the game refers to this route as internally. Either that, or Side B, although the mention of Side B only appears in one object in the game to my knowledge, where Weird Route seems to pop up a little more frequently. There is absolutely no way I can make this video without talking about the Weird Route, because in a meta context, this is pretty much a giant sequence break. It doesn't feel like it should be possible, but it is. What is otherwise a playthrough of the chapter that lasts from at least 5 to up to 7, maybe even 9 hours, is now down to just over 2 or 3 hours. Major sections are skipped or otherwise cut down, lore dumps are glossed over, character development happens off screen, and a major character to the chapters straight up fucking dies, so there's quite a bit that's cut out of the picture. I still remember first hearing about this route when Chapter 2 came out, and people genuinely did not believe it existed just from reading a summary of it, and yet it was real. And I can't help but feel like that was kind of the intention. And actually, before I continue on, it's kind of hit me as I've been doing nothing but talking about Deltarune and meta shit and spamton for who knows how long now. This part especially has been kind of a lot at once, and I feel like the pacing has been a little wild. Hopefully not bad or too fast or anything, but there's just been a lot to cover, and I feel inclined to keep rushing through it, but we're effectively halfway through the series as a whole at this point. So how about we take it a little slower for a bit? I think this is what they call an intermission, except not really.
Okay.
I just need an excuse to indulge for a few minutes and illustrate what I think is one of Deltarune's most important themes. And it's not quite just escapism. When I was editing Half-Bread's part of the DeltaCast months ago, there's this part that stuck out to me where there's an association made between Noelle and glitch hunting and, just the idea of creepy video game stuff in general. And I think it's honestly a good way to embody just what I think the weird route is before I get to really talking about it. So, how about I let him cook for a bit just cuz before I give my own perspective on this side of things and on the route in general going forward.
We've gotten in the spamton ARG about Noelle is that she used to run a video game glitches and like rumors blog essentially.
Yep.
And so she was doing that for her entire childhood. And then when you take her to the Spamton door in the Snowgrave route, which opens essentially like you're finding a glitch, you have to do this really counterintuitive series of steps. She calls that door nostalgic, which someone in my chat pointed out could be a reference to her feeling nostalgic for her days glitch hunting in these sort of creepy video games. So, like, Noelle is very strongly associated with, like, creepypastas, video game glitches, that whole culture at this point.
The glitch hunting thing is tied back to Gaster, too.
True.
Which is because that's how you find Gaster in the first place.
What with the fun values?
It's extremely meta, because essentially what we have here is we have all these ideas of glitch hunting and video game creepypasta culture being brought up in a video game.
I find it kind of fascinating how much the Deltarune fandom especially exploded after Chapter 2's release, and how it wasn't just during the wake of Spamton, but of the weird route itself. One of the main things I think people felt kind of unsure about in regards to Deltarune was Toby's, still even now, continued insistence on the game only having one ending. And yet, despite having never been advertised publicly in the game, having never been acknowledged by Toby to this day, and having almost no hint to this route in the playable game aside from, I don't know, maybe one thing that Lancer said if you bother to check your inventory when Noelle joined the party, the weird route is still one of the most often discussed topics of the game. Maybe not to casual players, but my point stands, and I really need to double down on this statement. The weird route was never advertised by Toby. There is no mention or allusion to the weird route in any of the store pages for the game. Secret bosses have been advertised, yes, maybe the eggs were never directly advertised and are more out of the way, but they feel just embedded enough in the game in a natural way that doesn't make you really question how it's even a thing, it's simply an Easter egg. But when I think about the weird route, I think about what Toby said way back when people were data mining Undertale and the sentiment he must have had in the ballpark of feeling like games can never have secrets simply hiding in them anymore. It's always dug up from the files now, without full context, without the reward of learning about these secrets by word of mouth, not being sure how to get to them, but knowing a guy who knew a guy who vaguely remembers how to do it, and has a fuzzy memory of it, but was sure that it existed and was attainable if they just looked hard enough.
That's what I mean. That's why I'm
The
like
art of
really
video
curious how many people just stumbled across the weird route on their first playthrough and just had that as their first experience.
And generally playground and internet rumors in some ways is kind of dead now because information has become so much easier to access. Inherently, thanks to the modern internet, but in the past years tenfold thanks to the landscape of theorizing and game analysis specifically coming down to here's what we found in the files, and if it's not in the files, then it doesn't exist, so it can't ever be true. However, this finality of existence or non-existence wasn't really always a thing, was it? There was a point in time where it was easier to tell stories of what might be.
Sonic
could be.
EXE.
The Bigfoot in San Andreas, the Mew under the truck, or maybe the Missing Nose, instantly getting the ray gun in Black Ops Zombies, the tall faceless man in the suit, and perhaps even the spirit inhabiting an uncanny Link statue in an old Zelda game, or the kind of weird-looking Tails doll in that one Sonic racing game everyone kept bashing back in the day when most of the YouTubers I used to watch didn't yet share political opinions that aged like fucking milk. Point is, whether you simply call them rumors, or creepypastas, or just glitches, the weird route harkens back to this time a lot for me. The effort made to have people assume initially that the game was going to have only one ending, only to leave this in, knowing for sure people were going to find it on their own and spread the word on their own, is about the closest I have gotten to that feeling in a while. A long one at that. The slightest feeling that perhaps not all rumors are simply rumors, but that some of them just might be true. If you're about as old as I am, or maybe even a bit older, it is nostalgic, isn't it? Maybe it takes you back to when video games felt more grandiose in their nature, if you will. when your imagination could run wild as you not only played through the games you did, but also explored every inch of your favorite games, replaying them countless times, digging as deep as possible into them, trying to find secrets that may or may not be there, but it didn't matter whether they were or not. What mattered was that you were curious.
I think the closest thing, I'm not an unk, I'm pretty young, I'm 23. Think about that for a second. But the closest thing I had for this like secret hunting was Black Ops Zombies. If you're not too familiar with zombies, you might not be aware that Easter eggs and the community of Easter eggs is pretty huge for the zombies community. Every map has an Easter egg, and when a new map dropped, it was such a big thing for me and my friends of Easter egg hunting, trying to find the steps, and just secret hunting. It was always a massive event to look forward to. And for me, my favorite, I mean, that feeling of chasing a hidden secret in the game was a very big part of my childhood in that regard, which you don't see too much in games. I mean, you probably get like maybe one or two little things, like shoot this and you get like a statue, but it wasn't you don't get stuff that's completely hidden to build towards a larger story, and it is really refreshing that Deltarune does it. And I didn't really think about that actually until I just mentioned this video, so
And
I'm
that
really glad they brought
curiosity
that
may
point
have
up.
faded over time, as it naturally does, for better or worse. Yet, Deltarune feeds on that curiosity. Deltarune encourages it even. Not quite in the sense of exhausting outcomes like Undertale, no, this is different. It feeds on the nostalgia for finding things that may or may not be there, even if you end up merely chasing shadows. Yes, the developer may have said the game only has one ending, but that's just on the surface. Everything else is there for you to find on your own, and it always feels like there's still something we haven't quite found yet, even when you do data mine the game. You might have noticed in this part I've been rambling more about the lore of the game than in part 1. One reason for it really is that part 1 already covered a lot of the super meta stuff that piqued my interest, and part 2 has just been following up on those things more than it was adding completely new elements to the table. But aside from that, there's many things about the lore that do tie into it. If the meta stuff was simply to illustrate that the mechanics are in place for these themes to be expressed efficiently, right now I'm trying to show you what those themes even are. Everyone's talked a lot about the game through the lens of escapism and creating fiction as a means to cope with reality, but I think another potential cornerstone of the game's thematic foundation is nostalgia and curiosity. And I think Chapter 2 focuses on this especially as it challenges the preset linearity that the game set you up to expect over its full course. And so, it's an interesting dichotomy that has now been established in the game's meta-narrative to me. While as far as we know, the game will have the same ending no matter what, and even if there's plenty of evidence or ways to technically prove or disprove the possibility for certain things to happen, you just can't help but ask yourself,
What if?
don't you miss exploring?
Yeah.
Don't you miss the playground rumors? Sure, the thought of not knowing everything and something potentially sinister or completely malign hiding somewhere in your favorite game or media is scary. But is the complete finality that we have such easy access to now to remove all that mystique really much better? Is it not simply more interesting to dig into everything about a thing you like, even if it might not be inherently part of the intended experience? Even if it might break some things in the process? This is what I think the Weird Route illustrates, and especially highlights. Deltarune encourages you to find secrets in itself, and the Weird Route to me is the absolute most extreme application of that. Not just going off the beaten path, but finding an entire loophole to both forge your own path and mold the already laid out one into something completely different. Something much more bizarre, with no help, no guidance on if you're even supposed to be able to do this, if this is even meant to be real. And with the fact that the character, who is a known glitch hunter, is the one responsible for this route even being possible, I think it's only natural that a character of that sort is the channel through which we are now forced to lay our nostalgia and curiosity bare for the game to see, and to break itself down upon. And you'll see soon enough that I think a lot of the themes in this game, in fact, do tie back around to Noel, or at least to Des, and the Weird Route and its sheer lack of any hints or advertising for it beforehand goes to show for me that Deltarune knows exactly what it's doing. It's not just hiding secrets. Deltarune lives in secrets, in what could be. Secrets, after all, turn to rumors, and rumors turn to fiction. You can see this in many smaller ways, between the very obtuse way you find Chapter 1's egg especially, or the secret bosses, or even that creepy smile in the Queen's basement that you could have sworn you saw for a split second. But the weird route's very nature especially is shrouded in darkness. Just like how, for a time, all of those same mysteries and creepypastas and glitches were once shrouded in that same darkness, like some of us might wish it still was. Especially when that was at its peak and the scope of internet horror was much different, it was easier to believe that kind of stuff. Or maybe I was just a dumb kid. I don't know. Like, this was the age where I was afraid of Slender Man finding me in my sleep, and I actually thought I saw him once. Or at the age where I was obsessed with Tails doll summoning videos, and back when Mudahar used to make haunted gaming vids. Man. But regardless, the existence of this route completely subverts the expectations and established meta-narrative that Chapter 1 appeared to be setting up. And it adds a lot—
I read to a video a while ago called How the Internet like Changed Undertale. And I know the creator made one about Sonic. Would you guys want to see that as a reaction out of curiosity? I mean, I think Sonic's pretty cool. My best bud is like the biggest Sonic fan, but I'm honestly not the most enlightened in Sonic as a whole. So I wouldn't mind checking that out. If you'd want to see that, let me know.
Of potential
I probably
depth
will
what
react to it at some point.
Getting at. In Undertale, the existence of a pacifist and no mercy route made sense as it was meant to be a way of subverting the expectations of how people are used to playing RPGs, questioning what really constitutes completing a game and being happy with it, and making sure it did everything it could to remind you that this is not a game where you are above consequences. The routes all played into each other well, and each one served their own purpose to the game's meta-narrative. So, for a game like Deltarune to start by making sure you thought it was like Undertale, just to pull a psych on you and give you complete whiplash with something totally new and hammering this point in of your choices not meaning anything, only to actually give you the option to do a route like this if you really went out of your way to look for it, is a hell of a curveball. But at the very least, I do want to take a look at this route, note all of the things that I think really stand out that may be relevant to more meta stuff, which is probably going to be a fucking majority of it, but you know, and just leave it at that. We have no idea still where the hell this kind of route will go from Chapter 2, but I think there's no harm in gathering any relevant info from it anyway. So let me start with the general gameplay loop of this route. Okay, off script, I know I keep saying route and route interchangeably. I don't know which one it is. Is it route or route? I don't know, poke me in the comments or something about it if it matters, because I have no fucking idea.
Why did they ask
I have
that?
no respect for this goddamn language, honestly, I'm not gonna lie to you. When starting a weird route, the whole chapter up until you meet Noelle on your own is completely identical, so we can just skip through all of that. Once you meet Noelle though, and have her in your party, you're able to begin the route as soon as you use Ice Shock for the first time. You freeze your first enemy and you hear a very ominous jingle that pretty much trailheads the weird route. The first step here is pretty much just freezing every enemy you come across in Cyber City, as you notice her health actually goes up a bit with each encounter that she freezes. It may also be worth noting that you were able to bring Noelle to the door to Spamton's shop, and she comments on it being creepy, yet also nostalgic. When the second weird route jingle plays, then using this video as reference, this would be once you clear every enemy in the trash zone, the roads stop having cars, and now there's more enemies for you and Noelle to freeze. After killing a few more, a third jingle plays, and now even the stats menu changes, with Chris and Noelle having very bare-bones descriptions. Chris having the title of Leader and the description Commands, and Noelle with the title of Frostmancer, who freezes the enemy. Notably, she is level 2 at this point, where normally she would be at level 1, as a snowcaster with a description might be able to use some cool moves. The first annoying mouse room also provides the first opportunity of very cool Sigma-based them-be moments from Chris, or rather yourself, although you do not need to do this in order to carry out the weird route, it's not mandatory. Normally, you just push this block to the appropriate spot so Noelle can catch up to you, but through repeatedly walking down to the exit, you get the first of many dialogue prompts that simply just read, "Proceed." This being an option that pops up many times in later conversations with Noelle, but we'll get to them shortly. While this isn't necessarily important to the weird route, it certainly is out of character enough that I'd consider it part of that ballpark. Because even if not required for this route, Noelle still comments on how bossy that was
like
Chris.
that. I really don't like that at all.
Just forcing your will upon them and making them act extremely out of character just so you can force a different outcome.
So
Moving on,
shitty.
the city continues to be ever slightly more empty than before, with a noticeable lack of characters like most of the Addisons at this point in the route. A fourth jingle now plays once you get to the room with the Ferris wheel ad after killing every enemy up to that point. And this ad is where another very worrying interaction can happen, I believe similarly not mandatory, but still stands out, where you can select "I will ride with you," and then "Noelle will ride with me," to her understandable concern, just shrugging it off as a prank. Then you talk to the Addison near the Ferris wheel ad and tell them that you and Noelle are not friends, but something else, and this is where they tell you about the freeze ring and that Noelle can't get stronger without good equipment. You can say, "Get it," only to come up $1 dark short. And then a few more times, Noelle realizes you're asking her to get it, and after pretty much forcing her through insistence, she kills the Addison, and you get the freeze ring. This is also one of a few instances where she's basically trying to convince herself that she didn't do anything and that nothing actually bad happened. She continues to do this, the bracketed dialogue implying that she's thinking to herself and not saying this stuff out loud. And then you're given a dialogue choice to tell her that her thoughts of getting Chris zapped are either horrible or natural. And this is definitely worth noting meta-wise, since it's the first instance of the game acknowledging the fact that the player is able to read other characters' thoughts, and said characters actually getting kind of freaked out by that. And this eventually leads into Noelle realizing that she's hearing a voice that is definitely not Chris's. The fifth jingle now plays, and at this point the city now plays a slower version of its theme. You continue to kill enemies, and the save points even change their flavor text, now saying that you and Noelle were filled with power. Enemies start running away from you when they spot you now rather than towards. Any signs that used to stop cars are now frozen as there's no need for them anymore. And when you go down to where the fake out game over and second egg used to be, instead you're met with a closed dumpster with Spamton hiding inside of it. He actually enables you to continue going down this route, as he implies he has a deal for you if you kill more enemies, telling you specifically how many you're still missing. When you reach the second and third mouse puzzles, there's more very awesome and based interactions that, proceed to take place, pretty much brute forcing through both puzzles, as Noelle struggles to deal with her coping mechanism of blinking any memories of her actions this far from her recollection completely. A sixth and seventh jingle play at these puzzles respectively, and after killing all the enemies in the room after, you'll have met all the requirements for Spamton's deal, which, for 1997 Chromer, you get the Ring of Thorns, which makes Noelle take damage while wearing it down to 55 HP, but reduces the cost needed to cast Ice Magic. And finally, the main event, or at least one of the two main events, the fight with Birdly. Noelle just sees Birdly as another enemy at first before giving a 1,000-yard stare at him, and after another Sigma NB moment, the fight begins with Noelle urging Birdly to run away. The music is much more simple, more intense than it would be originally, and even where Chris is down, Noelle doesn't listen to Birdly because she still hears the player's voice. And once you reach max TP, you're able to use a new spell, Snowgrave, which is just described as... Noelle insists that she doesn't know what that spell is, she doesn't know what you're talking about, but eventually snaps at you and does it anyway, just because you wanted to see it so badly.
Man.
And then... Noelle just asks what happened, completely blinking on what she just did only a few seconds ago before leaving through the upper alley and going back to her room in the mansion. You go up that same path, which immediately just sends you to the entrance to Queen's mansion as you regroup with Susie and Rouse. Susie notices pretty quickly that Chris looks upset, which I think goes without explaining as to why. But is shrugged off pretty quickly, and at this point the sequence break part of the route really kicks into full gear because what the fuck? The mansion is totally barren, as things like Susie's ultimate healing and the lore surrounding certain Darkners not belonging in other Dark World is explained very unceremoniously. Instead of the usual music playing, now Deal Gone Wrong plays throughout the mansion as you find out the butlers are holed up somewhere and the Queen is nowhere to be even found. You also learn that the strange force that's taken over is Spamton as he's changing forms down in the basement, thanking you and Noelle for giving him the opportunity to do so, only specifying that he sure hopes no one tries to steal the fountain. I don't have much to say about the mansion up until the very end, honestly, other than some things are altered, like you fight Mousewheel, Task Manager, and Wire in different rooms, and the table puzzle is now just a Peepus maze. That is literally it, I think. But the next notable part is when you're near Noelle's room. Susie asks Chris to go with her to save Noelle, but Chris doesn't say anything, and you don't get any choice to make Chris say anything either. Rouse does the thing he usually does when Susie's off on her own, asking if Chris wonders what Susie is doing, but again, no response. Which could be taken as Chris trying to keep the player's perspective away from Susie as much as possible now. Although Rouse then says, "You're right, Chris, it has only been 30 seconds. Which, it could have one of two meanings, because this is yet another instance of Rouse to me just being kinda weird. On top of me already mentioning that this moment pretty much results in Susie coming back and Rouse trying to learn what happened, only for Susie to shrug it off and say she'll explain it later, which prompts Rouse to be probably more caught off guard than in any other moment in the game. I feel like him saying this could either mean that Chris told him that it's only been 30 seconds, which could be possible because we never hear Chris's voice. But I also wonder if, assuming he's just referring to the player here and not Chris, that he takes the silence from the player as a response of that sort. Susie also seems very eager to move on, and I can't help but wonder if she's just trying to get going with stopping Queen, or if even with what she told about what happened that there's something about her conversation with Noelle that made either of them uncomfortable. But you continue on, having completely skipped that sequence, and also skipped the Queen boss fight altogether, as she notes that Noelle isn't in a condition to help her now, and she can't find Birdley anywhere. All of the important lore you get here regarding the roaring as such is completely glossed over.
I love Queen
Susie
so
then goes
much.
to see Noelle again before you leave to seal the fountain, and I think there's
Just
a pretty strong
know if you
implication
ever
here
see
that Noelle
me
is just
with someone dressed up as Queen, I'm exactly where I want to be.
dead asleep in her room at this point after everything that happened, or at least that there's something that was left out in whatever Susie said about Noelle in her room, but anyway. You go to seal the fountain, and so the other main event happens. The mandatory fight against Spamton Neo as he's pissed at you for trying to seal the fountain and breaking whatever alliance he thought he had with you. And so the fight starts. And there's a lot of dialogue that Spamton throws out that's unique to this fight, one bit being, "You've been making, haven't you? You've been making hyperlink blocked." Which I think adds further to my best guess that when he mentions hyperlink blocked, it must be referring to control or also likely freedom or possibly even power? Could power be a potential mechanic similar to how determination is, in the sense that having more of it just gives you more control over reality? I mean, aside from the save point mentioning that you're just filled with power, it does say you're otherwise filled with the power of something, and that power is what regenerates your HP and what lets you save. Hell, the song that's used when you're sealing fountains is called Your Power. And that's a second potential video to make about Deltarune aside from talking about stats. Jesus Christ, man. The fight doesn't have anything of note until his defense phase when you're unable to leave a dent in him until you try acting. It starts with just blank prompts showing Rase or Susie's icons saying that nobody came when Chris tried to call for their help. And then you get to Noelle's icon, where it's not Chris calling for help, it's you whispering Noelle's name. While there are instances of the game using you and Chris interchangeably, it's pretty universally agreed upon that this is a case where the distinction is likely very intentional. Spamton scolds you at first for it, before...
Before? Is that my buddy?
Yeah, sorry, there's a lot of moments in this chapter that I think are just better left without summary. Back in the light world, Noelle wakes up and she recounts some of what happened with Susie, and Birdley doesn't wake up. She just shrugs it off as exhaustion and him resting a bit and then quickly leaves. There's only a few things that should really be mentioned at this point. Going to Castletown is just kinda depressing as Queen is one of the only people who really make it there since, well, you fucking killed everyone else, and the fact that this route makes Queen actually kind of upset is good enough reason for me to never want to play it myself. And the last thing I can really go over now is what happens when you go to the hospital. The interaction mostly plays out as normal, but slightly altered so that now Noelle doesn't want to give Rudy control over her game to him, and once you leave the room, Rudy asks to have a word with Susie, and Noelle keeps convincing herself that what happened was just a dream, but can't help but feel like it was too real to not be something else. And she becomes aware of a voice that was telling her what to do, one unlike Chris's. And she catches on to how weird Chris has been acting in general and wants to figure out why. You get a dialogue choice saying that you wanted to see Noelle or just her father. Either way, she gets startled, and after she tries to assure herself that it was just a dream, even after hearing your voice again, you get the choice to either say nothing or that it wasn't actually a dream. Susie walks in, and Noelle, again, quickly leaves. There's other things that are unique to this scene.
Why do I low-key ship Chris and Noelle? No, but thing is, I hate the fact that Chris is just taking like. There's potential with him, but I just don't like the do this now. I control you. I don't care. But I could see the vision. You know what I mean?
As well, like her noticing that you have her watch if you ever equipped it on Chris in the Dark World. Or the fact that this is the only scene so far where you have player control outside of this dialogue box, and you can step towards Noelle to skip to the later bit of her dialogue, then again to make her tell you to stop getting closer, and then one more time to just dismiss the scene entirely. And that's the weird route. The game ends the same way even if you go through this route in its entirety, although there are plenty of moments throughout the weird route where you are able to abort it, whether by selecting a different dialogue choice, or choosing to spare Birdley or use anything other than Snowgrave on him to deplete his health. In this case, everything pretty much goes back to normal and the game progresses through the normal route again, and a new jingle plays as a cue of this. But other than that, that is honestly everything I can say about it.
I love this.
Honestly, that's kind of a wrap for this part of the game.
My favorite shot of Deltarune is when the Dark Fountain opens up. And the Titan spawns. But this shot,
Analysis overall.
Cinema.
What a fucking ride. This chapter has been incredibly dense. I'm adding some of this in last minute because in the rush of trying to just get through all these topics, I've realized how easy it is to forget to know when to wrap things up proper because I didn't want to stretch this video's runtime any longer than it already is. I think where Chapter 1 gave me a lot of room to focus on some of the more meta parts of the game, Chapter 2 was mostly following up on those things, but also adding so many things to the table that we can't even begin to fully understand in the bigger picture, to the point that I felt I had no choice but to go kind of rapid fire with some of what I talked about. There's God knows how many ways to go from here on, and as it stands, with only 2 chapters out for us to play, we're at yet another cliffhanger. Chapter 1 may have established the game's themes of control and how that influences a player-protagonist dynamic and the dissonance between us and Chris, but Chapter 2 really nailed that theme in like nothing else. Chris has been given a lot more moments to be able to act and do things on their own accord and to get in the way of some of our actions, and likewise we have had many more opportunities to completely break the order of things and, if you really wanted to, impose your will on Chris to the point of using them to manipulate their friends into much more concerning circumstances. And yet, despite all of that, at the end of the day, we have a similar deal as with Chapter 1's ending. A hint of normalcy, only for it to be disturbed as Chris pulls out the soul a few more times to steer things in their favor so that Susie can stay at their house, by getting Toriel to invite her over after slashing her tires and getting her to call the police later at night before they wake up in the dead of it, pull the soul out, open the door, turn on the TV that they had plugged in the night before, and take one last look at Susie before stabbing the floor with their blade, creating a dark fountain of their own, before putting the soul back in and sleeping once more, as we see a smile form in the TV and roll credits. That's where we are now, and I imagine we'll be here for a good while still. And while we do have more evidence of trends regarding the meta side of things, and in the secrets and Easter eggs in general, we still have so many questions and gray areas that have left people at each other's throats for the past few years now as to what it all means. Frankly, I'm still not even fully confident in some of my findings. After all, it's only really set in stone once we see some of these supposed trends carried across maybe 3 or more chapters. But with the second one being a sort of foundation for future ones to be built off of, it does give me more confidence than I might have had initially with only 1 chapter to work with. And furthermore, the sheer volume of what was found in Chapter 2 puts the first one to bed, honestly. Even what we learned internally, and with the eggs and Rouse gives us so much to work with. And Spamton alone has so much depth to him in relation to the fourth wall and meta-fuckery that I had to dedicate a whole segment within a segment to him, and how he contributes to the meta-narrative and how secret bosses in general complement or contrast it. And that's not even going into the weird route, whereas for that, we have no idea how the hell this plays into the meta-narrative, honestly, because of just how out of the blue it was when it was first discovered, and we also have no clue how this is going to affect later chapters or just how future weird routes might unfold, until we actually get more content for
I was
Deltarune.
wondering how there's like an hour left on this video. Sweepstakes. You learned so
like 5 or
much
6
in
months from now or
sweepstakes, don't you?
something. And really, for Deltarune's demo as a whole, there's only a few things that I might not have mentioned, that being stuff in the code perhaps? Such as how the parent object for monster data in the game appears to be named Echidna, referencing the Greek monster of legend, which is a pretty interesting way to tie in its function as a parent
Well,
object.
Knuckles.
And to quickly explain in game maker terms what that means, that's just the kind of object that you can link to different children objects, and what that does is, whatever code and traits you put in the parent object, the children objects can inherit those same traits and it overwrites some of it with their own unique data. And that's what seems to be happening here with Echidna and it being linked to Darkner data in general, but I don't know how that fits into things at the moment other than it being a super obscure and more recent discovery. And there's also all the weird as fuck text for the error handlers in the game, which is also in parent objects for things such as interactable objects and what have you. I'll link the respective videos from Halfbread about Echidna and these error handlers elsewhere if you want a deeper look at it yourself, but it is very strange. Stuff like your eyes became blurry and emptiness filled your hands, or suddenly your body seizes up. What are you looking at? As if this flavor text is commenting on the fact that you shouldn't be seeing these objects at all to begin with. God, and I forgot about the manual too, fuck. Rouse has this manual that he gives you in Chapter 1, but you're
yeah.
never able to read it. At least in game, you're not able to. The pages of the manual are actually in the data, and there's some unused features mentioned in there, like the dog option in the battle section, or a talk function for the overworld menu that we'd never actually see. And even that has scripts for it in the code that go unused, and its error handler text, or just using it on invalid targets, just says, "Your voice echoes aimlessly." And there's also this weird-ass poem and some other error handlers? Like, fuck man, you tell me what to make of this, because even with everything I've covered, I am completely at a loss for these lines. I'd argue these almost go in the same kind of ballpark as the unused scripts maybe, where maybe we might get some context for these later, and I can't imagine a scenario where you'll actually see some of this error handler text intentionally if you find some way
I think so.
to break the game, so to speak, in a way that's by design or part of some weird route, but I am throwing completely baseless shots at this point. And that's a good sign for me to say that I think I can safely wrap up my deep dive of Chapter 2 and of this demo in general. Maybe I've missed some really specific things, but I do believe I have everything I could reasonably gather that could be relevant to what this video has always been about. What I think Deltarune is meta-narratively speaking, and what the game's meta-narrative even is, or at least what pieces of it we do have with Chapters 1 and 2. Can we talk about that now? We're surely over 30,000 words in. Why are we still on this screen? What the f-
$4.99.
I'm so sad I missed out on this. I hope they do another one soon.
After everything I've done, you fucking pull up!
But wait, there's more. The end is never the end, is never the end, is never the end, is never the end.
I wonder if there's those
September
two
17th,
sweepstakes, right?
2022. Only a few days prior, we got what is, at the moment, the second or maybe actually third most recent status update we have on Deltarune. I don't know, it depends when the last newsletter released. Anyway, chapters 3 through 5 are the next batch of content Toby and company plan to release as a proper full game drop once it's ready, and alongside showing off some neat teasers for chapter 3 and also a bit of chapter 4, we know that they have at least a chapter's worth of stuff already done by now, so let's say they're already about or even over a third of the way through, at most closer to half. Frankly, it's at least another year before we get more content, assuming there's no severe complications that pop up, but with what we already have, there's still plenty to talk about of the game until then. But aside from this update, we got an announcement for a charity event to celebrate Chapter 2's anniversary, the Spamton Sweepstakes being held on the 17th and ending on the 18th. People could donate, and as long as you were in the United States, you could enter once to have a chance at winning one of many cool spamton-themed items. Oh, and also if you're rich or something, you could participate in a few auctions for some even higher value items, all the money from those auctions also going to charity. With all the
That is
content
really
we already
cool.
got about Deltarune,
It's such a
there was
good
no reason
idea.
to really think more of this event. It's for a good cause, and this still wasn't the longest gap in content, and to hear that Toby and his team are already making so much progress after just a year is certainly good news. I was satisfied with this and was ready to go into the next year waiting just as patiently as usual.
Flashing lights warning.
Surely there was nothing more to these sweepstakes than just funny items. Little did I know what I'd wake up to.
Yes! Yes!
26 pages. 26 secret pages dotted along the sweepstakes site containing many, many things. From spamton sightings to small and larger peeks at Chapter 3 to most importantly, a lot of new information about the bigger picture in regards to Deltarune's lore, a good chunk of it being in the form of blog posts from a Holiday Girl 1225, aka Noelle Holiday.
What?
This
No way.
motherfucker. He made what is just a few levels away from a Deltarune ARG. If I had any excuse to not make this video, those were completely thrown out the window after I learned of this. Immediately I took to Twitter, started archiving, screenshotting, recording every little thing I could possibly find in the event it were to be removed after the sweepstakes' conclusion, or just so that I could reach more people. And even then, I still missed a few things here and there. This was fucking huge, and given this was the most recent major development in regards to Deltarune, I'm still kind of processing just how insane this was. What a way to hold us over while we wait for the next 3 chapters. And Jesus Christ, don't even get me started on the fucking finale. RTVS held this stream like 30 minutes beforehand, and somehow I never made the connection that they were involved in making something Deltarune related. It was just like 30 minutes straight of some random cryptic shit before they threw up a link to the finale video. I hadn't felt something that visceral since Chapter 2's announcement a year prior. Just, man. I really want to call attention to just how sudden and surreal this event was for me, because I genuinely did not expect to be getting this much of a peek at new stuff so soon after Chapter 2. I guess to be fair, considering we're getting 3 times the amount of content for the next drop, it makes sense to have much more to tease with, but regardless, it was amazing not only for the new stuff we got to see, but also for the light it shed on things that we might not have even thought twice about before, and on events that took place before our involvement as the player that gave us a very striking insight into our cast of characters, particularly Chris, Susie, and Noelle. And I love it. God, I love it so much, and I feel like what it's done for the community at large was really important, and I'll look back on that time very fondly. But I don't want to spend all this time just rambling over how much I love the sweepstakes, because of course we're here to talk about it in the context of meta stuff. Though, it's kind of hard to do so because this is very far removed from anything relating to the game from a meta standpoint. The medium is entirely different, so it's not like I'm going to get much in terms of what the meta narrative could be or any UI elements that may be important. However, the next best thing I can do is look at what the sweepstakes gave us and see if it adds on to any current leads I already laid out when talking about the first few chapters. So to quickly lay out everything that we got in the sweepstakes, we obviously have all of the secret pages, of which
Okay, how many of these? December, okay. Ice Palace, Glacier. Damn you, Tenor. Holy shit, Blue Circle, the Peppers. Shadowman.
To the code webpage, and after just counting them myself, there are 26 of them, which I've listed here, not counting the main sweepstakes page and the credits. It definitely looks like a lot to go through, but thankfully, because of what we're specifically looking for, we can narrow it down quite a bit to 17 pages. And I can even put them into different groups based on what leads it gives us that may be relevant to what I'm talking about. On top of that, we have the spamton Q&A that happens somewhere midways into the sweepstakes. Once again, there are a lot of questions and answers, but I've narrowed it down to a more comfortable 6, maybe at most like 8 that seem relevant maybe. And finally, we have the finale video, but for the sake of my sanity, and also because Toby clarified that anything that may happen in it is not canon, I'm not going to really factor that into it all that much, because if you need to know absolutely anything about RTVS, it's that they are very, and I mean very good at one thing especially. Making shit up.
I need to watch
invented
this.
around the time that Julius Caesar bought his first iPad.
Now most of these things you don't have to worry about. It's too stressful to think about all these cables and holes and colors. We don't need any of it. I'm a child.
If you touch the node one more time, there's gonna be hell to pay. I'm gonna bring all the Team Fortress 2 mercenaries to your house, and they're going to shoot rockets at you and beat you and your dog with hammers.
But with that out of the way, let's just start by looking through all the pages that I thought were important for this video. First, with what I'd like to call the trailhead of the whole thing. Code and comments. You can access code through the web ring ad at the bottom of the main sweepstakes page, and likely this is the first blog post from Noelle you would have come across, either this or Cat Petters. While at first this post seems totally unrelated to Deltarune, you'll see that her allusion to Dragon Blazers is actually meant to be a parallel to the Deltarune sweepstakes. Right now the post says that she found about 26 pages, but this number was actually lower during the sweepstakes and would be updated over time to count the number of pages that either people have discovered, or that Toby knew would be reasonably accessible to people at any given moment. So this page is just to declare how many secret sites there are, as well as introducing us to the whole Noelle blog element of the sweepstakes, making sure that people understood it wasn't an outright ARG, but did have stuff hidden in it. However, this is the point where I do want to mention something that I hadn't brought up until now, and this is one of those things that I think people in general didn't catch on to all that much until the sweepstakes shed a light on it. That being, there are quite a lot of allusions to this fictional game in Deltarune, Dragon Blazers. And when you look at most, if not all of these references to it, they actually can make pretty good parallels to things that either happened or could happen in Deltarune. So for instance, Susie mentioning Dragon Blazers 2 in Queen's Mansion and talking about how even if your sister gets cursed and has bad stats, she's still your party member, which in a way could be an allusion to Noelle in her inexperience with Dark Worlds, at least on a normal route. And there's a reference to Dragon Blazers 3 mentioned in both chapters in the hospital, the first time with Noelle saying that she's stuck at the Ice Palace, and the second time her playing it with Rudy, or not on a weird route, and being stuck at a certain point. mentioning that the mage left the party, as well as mention of a move called Fire Shock, which is very similar to Noelle's Ice Shock ability in the Dark World. And of course, when Noelle is taught how combat works in the Dark World, she directly compares it to Dragon Blazers, so with all of this in mind, and knowing what else the sweepstakes have hidden for us, it definitely implies that there's connections to be made between the two, and Dragon Blazers possibly acting as foreshadowing for Deltarune. This might be very important for my theory, as it is an instance of Deltarune, a fictional piece of work, making its own fiction to allude to itself, and not only that, but knowing that we might visit the Ice Palace, and Dragon Blazers related stuff in the future, I'm certain this will eventually become relevant. Hell,
Which
it
we
already
do
kind of
in
is.
chapter
But I'll
3.
get
I don't know
back
if
to
you
that
visit the
later.
Ice Palace
Moving
in
on.
chapter 3. I need to do that.
The code page
but
doesn't have more for us other than a
definitely
link to the
Dragon
comments
Blazer
page.
reference
There
heavy.
isn't much for us in this one other than an interaction between Noelle and Birdley, and then eventually Sports, who I now assume to be Jockington. Though I originally thought maybe it was Chris, but aside from the username, Jockington also is known to have many images of the same soccer ball as shown here in Deltarune, so it's definitely him. The only thing I could really note here is Birdley's phone number, which I first thought may have been a lead. This is Molly. Today is September 17th, 2022. The Spamton sweepstakes are happening, and what I was expecting a lot of crazy rewards, you know, maybe a bit of lore here and there. What I was not expecting was info on Chapter 3 through several fucking secret pages. I don't know what's going on. We haven't even unlocked everything yet, but we got Chapter 3 sneak peeks through this, so that's really cool. But okay, I've already compiled everything I could right now. There's a specific page, it's the Dragon Blazers comments. Birdley is one of the people commenting, and, you know, his, like, first username is his phone number. And they're saying, like, you know, whoever's prank calling my phone needs to stop. The phone number is right there. I'm gonna try calling it. I don't know if it's gonna take me anywhere.
I've not heard about this at all.
I don't know if it was just a bunch of random numbers. But I'm gonna see. I'm gonna call it right now, and I'm gonna see if I get anything. This is just to try it out. This is the only thing I haven't really done while I'm waiting on everything else to get unlocked, so... Yeah, no, okay, that does nothing. Okay. But, you know, I just wanted to try it. I was curious. That's all. But not only does it not really take you anywhere, but the number is also randomized every time you load the page, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
That about does it for the trailhead, so now let's look into the
That
next
would've been
real
cool,
batch of
though.
pages that I thought were important for this video, and that is everything regarding the egg. One of the very few pages in the sweepstakes that you're unable to access through a link is Man. This page just simply shows a sprite of one of the trees from the Scarlet Forest that we know to be associated with the man himself, with the caption for the page simply saying, "Behind the tree." Clicking at the very top of this tree, or clicking on the link for the cardboard box's description, takes you to our next blog post, Cat Petters. This post goes over one of the other game series that is alluded to in Deltarune, Cat Petters, which is a reference to the Pets series of games and are pretty closely paralleled in terms of description. Noelle talks about how the game is known for having a very deep animation system that's led to people modding the game a lot to have pets of whatever the hell they want, but this leading to them not being compatible, and causing breeding between modded pets to be a little bit spooky, which we know Noelle loves. And with the accompanying music showing an example, the modded pet breeding would result in either the average vine sauce corruption or the game
Jesus
simply
Christ.
saying incompatible pet with the music glitching out and scaring the shit out of Noelle to the point that she'd punish her pets for trying to fall in love. But at the end we get Until One Day, which takes us to the next part of this post, named Egg. This is the first post on Noelle's blog that goes completely dark visually. No more background, no logo or whatever, it's just plain old black and gray with white text. But before I talk about the contents of this page, let me show you something in this blog's code if you inspect it. See this body class thing right here? How it says dark? If you change it to literally anything else, the page actually goes back to normal. It only goes completely black like this when the body class is set to dark. I couldn't tell you for sure what this by itself might imply, if anything, other than the use of the class for this being dark could be one of many allusions to something going on with Noelle that I will get to in a moment. Oh goodness gracious. But as for the contents of this page, she goes over how if you have no pets, there's a rare chance for an egg to appear and give you one, which is how you can get some of the secret cats. However, one time when Noelle was trying to get said secret cats, she instead got a white egg with only the message "special" accompanying it. She had never heard of this before, and she waited to see it hatch, but it never did. She tried to get rid of it, worrying that it was a glitch or corruption, but she would not be able to move or throw the egg away. All she could do was click on it, and it would make a weird sound. She eventually just decided to raise it like a normal pet until it suddenly left the next day, as she was thinking about uploading it somewhere as a mod with a message saying that the egg left home due to happiness, whereas the game would usually say that a pet would leave due to sadness. And at the end of the post, she says that the egg actually had a name, but she doesn't remember what it was and it's been driving her crazy, before asking for anyone to sign her guest book if anyone else has seen it. Which I want to talk about for a moment, actually,
Wait, they
and
had
I
a
just want
name?
to state this for the record. I've seen the occasional acknowledgement of the fact that if you were to send an
I didn't
email
know
to
that.
an address with the name holidayGirl1225, you would get a response back that appeared to be automated from a Gaylort. I remember this back from when the sweepstakes were first happening, when the blog post used to say, "Please send me an email," or something along those lines at the end. And for the record, this email is not related to Deltarune or Undertale whatsoever, and this was confirmed by Fangamer in this email right here, literally when the sweepstakes were happening. And I don't see any reason to doubt their denial of it. And you might say, but Molly, what if they're just saying that because they can't confirm any ARG stuff? One, this was specified to not be an ARG specifically. I've dealt with ARGs for long enough to know how important this specification is, because if it's left unchecked, shit like this can happen, or worse. And two, if it really was related to Deltarune in any way, Fangamer would have probably neither confirmed nor denied it, and that's usually how it goes when you do these sorts of interactions in my experience. So again, I have no reason to doubt their word on this. I just mentioned it because I've seen in the past month or so some people still talking about it as a potential real mystery, and to be fair, the sweepstakes and the nature of that event being what it was, that shit was hectic. It all came out in the span of a day or two. But it also made me realize that there's probably no actual source compiling what happened with this outright, but this is why the pages would later change to say, "Please sign my guest book" at the end, before linking back to the code page. If Fangamer's denial of it wasn't enough for some reason, they literally had to edit the blog posts. I don't think it gets any more solid than that. That's all, I just felt that was important to get out there. Back on topic. Now, while Noelle might have thought that the egg happened due to having too many mods, this egg does sound awfully familiar, doesn't it? Can't do anything with it other than have it make a weird sound, and it always finding some way to get back even if you try to throw it away. This egg behaves almost identically to how the two eggs you can get in Deltarune behave, which in a way makes
No,
Cat Petters another instance of Deltarune using its own fictional media to refer to itself. This is very intriguing. While it doesn't really give much in the way of answers for why these eggs are even appearing or how they manage to maintain their form between the light and dark worlds, there is something here that might actually, just maybe, suggest that the eggs are genuinely related to Gaster, and it's this last line here, that Noelle, no matter how hard she tried, could not remember the egg's name. When it comes to anything involving Gaster, there is a lot of effort made to do everything but refer to him by name, save for the Gaster followers.
Okay, but the
You can't
egg
even
just
name
can't
yourself
be
Gaster
Gaster,
without the game
right?
restarting or crashing altogether, and the only ways we can really connect anything to Gaster are through certain calling cards of his rather than him directly, let alone by name. And even if this is a bit of a reach, the message that accompanied the egg, special, was written in all caps, so maybe there's something to that. And with what else we learn of Noelle, there's certainly more than enough implications that there's something possibly going on between her and Gaster, but I'll get to that later. Otherwise, I think this page was one of multiple instances of us getting just a bit more information out of certain leads,
It's
but there's still
friend,
plenty that we
but
don't
we
know
just
yet
don't
that
know
I don't think warrants us being fully confident in knowing just
what
what is
friend
going on with
is.
stuff like the egg. But at least we know Noelle has some relation to it and where the egg stuff might have first derived from. There is one more page though that relates to Cat Petters, which you can find through the link for the Peepus Bath Rugs description, which takes you to the blue circle page. Here, Noelle talks about her habit of checking every email she gets, including spam emails. And just from seeing her descriptions of one of the emails, they definitely are alluding to spamton, and one time she got an email that was just random numbers and letters. She plugged it into Cat Petters 2, and in it she got a new pet, which was just a single blue circle. It would never move, and it would occasionally just glitch out and had bad stats, and most other pets didn't like it. But this blue circle had a unique trait of multiplying itself eventually, each time popping up a congratulations message. And of course, as more of the blue circles did this, they would exponentially multiply, to the point that Noelle had to wipe all of her pets from the game. And that's about it. It goes without saying that this was spamton actually communicating to Noelle and giving her a Peepus in the form of a pet for her funny video game. And this calls attention to another thing that people might have missed out on before the sweepstakes but caught on to
Why
a
would it
little
duplicate?
more. That being a very particular connection that spamton and Noelle have. I'll quickly diverge and talk about the Q&A for a moment, as there's a few answers that Spamton gave here that pretty much explain the events of this blog post from his end, and I think for the first time in this whole series I'm actually going to talk about Des a little bit, Noelle's older sister. In Chapter 2, we get a lot of allusions to deaths, where before, all we knew is that deaths, like, hit Chris with a wiffle bat or something. But here,
What
we
is a
see not
wiffle
only her
bat?
name mentioned multiple times, like spelled out once, and then also shown to be the reason Noelle froze up at her spelling bee and let Birdley win, as it was one of the words she had to spell, but there's a lot of implications that Des is not here. At the very least just missing, likely even in her earlier childhood, since if you go into her room, while her search results aren't directly stated, one of them is a calendar where every month is December and every day is the 25th. So, she was searching December holiday in the computer lab a fucking lot, and with how Queen talks about her search history, she seems a bit concerned for her in that regard, and not to mention with Des rarely being mentioned in Hometown and there being no grief for her, we have no idea where she is or what her condition is at the moment. But this is where Spamton comes in. In the light
I
world,
think we see
Spamton
Des
was
in
simply
Chapter
just
5.
the mere concept of spam emails. But because Noelle would always check every email she got, she would especially check emails that Spamton sent to her that he describes as free friend find her. So she was really looking everywhere for any information on her, which Spamton says he of course didn't have, but would have loved to know any valuable information about Des or her likeness. People originally thought that this implied that Noelle was Spamton's mother, but in the Q&A this is clarified in that that's not the case at all, but rather that she was the only one that read all of his emails. Which is why he gave her a little blue gift, that being the same peepus that Noelle describes in the Blue Circle page. So, that pretty much establishes all the history that Spamton and Noelle had with each other before Deltarune takes place as a game, and it explains Spamton's particular connection to her and how that plays into the weird route, well with him referring to her as an angel and giving her the Thorn Ring as a gift after she wipes out Cyber City. And I grouped this page into the rest of the stuff about the egg because I do think both egg and blue circle illustrate a
questions I
very interesting...
have are, what is Pipis? Am I supposed to know? Is it just like this? I thought it was this meme object, you know, but it seemed to have some significance to Spamton. Do we know what that is? And also, how does Spamton have the Thorn Ring in his possession, and why?
Aspect of Noelle's backstory.
What is it to
Because
him?
not only do we know that Spamton has connections to her directly, but the egg post even implies that the man behind the tree that we'd see a few times in the game is also connected to her, which may even be Gaster that is connected to her. And knowing that Gaster definitely influenced Spamton and maybe at least partially related to the egg stuff, it does make me wonder, what the fuck could Gaster have to do with her? And that's not even all of the fuel in regards to that, but we'll get there soon enough. For now, let's move on. And let me show you a little secret. This is one of the pages you can access from the random ads that show up at the top of the sweepstakes site. 4 rows of 4 closets, most of which containing nothing, but a few containing stuff like a Rouse plush, a Peepus, or the screenshot referencing Superbad as a sort of inspiration for this event, probably. But aside from the main event that you're probably expecting, there is one other particular item that is really intriguing and terrifying. I'm going to link to a really good video that goes over the finer details of this discovery that Spooky Dude made, but to get to the point, you see this gumball
Spooky
machine?
Dude.
This isn't a stock image that Toby put up as a joke. It's a combination of different stock images of gumball machines put together and slightly edited, but Toby and company made this gumball machine asset themselves. This is... I don't even know what to say. There's one item description in the sweepstakes where Spamton refers to those chewed up bubblegum wrappers, which could be referencing this gumball machine, but other than that, I think this is it. Was Halfbread right? I mean, the only place where a gumball machine would make sense to appear, other than the festival that's mentioned to be coming up in-game in later chapters, is Icy's Petsa, and we only have one other instance in either Deltarune or Undertale that I can really point to where the use of heavily photoshopped assets were prominent. Is Omega Icy going to be real?
Okay.
I don't think a single teaser
We
in this
know
entire
what
event
the
has terrified
gumbo
me more than this one.
means now.
I don't know if I can handle this information. Let's just move on. Let's just forget this ever happened. I'm not ready for this yet. Fuck this. Okay.
Okay, by the way, I just want to say we are like 2 hours, we're quite far into this video. Please take the time to just drink some water, whatnot. Just make sure you stay
Back on
hydrated.
topic. In this page, most of the prizes you get, you can click back onto the main page and keep going with the closets, until you hit the 3rd closet on the last row, which takes you to...
What is that?
This shows nothing but a sprite of a chair with a cloth of some kind hanging from it. Judging from the look of it, I can't really attribute the appearance of this chair to anything in the game thus far, but it looks like it could be something to see during nighttime, or perhaps in some secret area in a future dark world. The caption for this page reads, "But what if it could?" Clicking on this chair changes it to a warping version of this sprite, shifting and almost completely covered in darkness, save for random blue pixels that vaguely remind me of the way that the tiles in Cyber City used to kind of corrupt and shift around a bit. The sound that plays here is almost identical to the ambient water noise used in Undertale, mainly with going with the boat person or in some select other places like the room with onions on. Except here, it's distorted, and the caption now reads, "Get darker than dark." But what if it could get darker than dark? A direct reference to Gaster in Entry 17, a use of something from Waterfall from Undertale, and not only that, but if you happen to be lucky, or maybe unlucky enough, clicking on this chair will give you a small jump scare of someone's laughter, the file name for this laughter being face.mp3, and showing nothing but a pair of eyes, one yellow and one pink, before sending you back to the main page. A friend that we haven't seen since Queen's Basement. And even if you just go back a page to the closets, the page is now broken, leaving only the one leading to the chair page open, none of them being interactable anymore, and the caption just reading, "You won?" with a question mark. While the connections to Gaster and between Deltarune and Undertale were already pretty clear, there's definitely no harm in having more fuel for that, with how vague everything still is. And if anything, seeing this pair of eyes again definitely confirms that whoever this is, which the name of the sprite is just Eyes, this will be an important character that we'll come across in the future, and they have something to do with Gaster and with whatever this chair is. Perhaps they're the next secret boss after all? We'll just have to wait and see when the next chapters drop, really.
That we know already?
The next batch of pages that are of interest starts with Icy, through another ad you can click at the top of the main page. This takes you to an Icy cryptid sighting website, documenting one of the sightings, courtesy of who appears to be a much younger Noelle Holiday, young enough that Des was still around at this time. The sighting itself doesn't provide too much of interest other than the worrying detail that that burnt Icy box is somewhere beneath the graveyard, and again, I don't know if I can handle Icy becoming a real part of the story, let alone a secret boss or something on the level of Omega Flowey. At the end of the page though, there's a link that's supposed to take us to the Icy settings that Des provided. However, clicking on it takes us to December, a fake 404 page made to look like Internet Explorer. It very well could just be another allusion to the fact that Des's existence is very much up in the air at the moment, and the fact that we get so little about her anywhere is definitely worrying.
That is really smart.
This page does pull a pretty clever one. One of the suggestions on this 404 page is to basically check your spelling. December didn't work. So, what about Des? It's a red guitar. Clicking on it plays a track called findher.ogg. At the very least, if we don't know much about her, there's one thing that this page does confirm. Finding Des is going to be an important part of the story. And if the name of the track being a literal prompt to find her wasn't enough proof of that, then I don't really know what is. She could be the character behind the unused strings. She could be the knight. She could be anywhere, but regardless, she is somewhere. Even if that somewhere might be nowhere. I personally think if there's anything all of this meta stuff is really building up to, this definitely has to be one of the biggest parts of it. And I wouldn't be surprised if that only further rings true when chapters 3 through 5 drop.
I think, right?
And while we're on this topic of talking about the main cast of characters, let's move on to the next few pages of interest. The first one being Chris.
I know we do see it in the Noelle and the Holiday House. That is chapter 4, right? Yeah.
Onto the link on the description for the Heart Locket, one of 2 private blog posts that actually give us some insight into Chris. This short but rather informative post gives us a glimpse of what Chris's friendship with Noelle was like in the past, and that they'd always come over to hang out with her before getting very still. As if they were remembering something, and then saying they were going to the dining room to get a snack, only to play on the piano. At first, she would go in to watch them play, only for Chris to stop playing after they'd notice her, so she just stayed on the couch in the living room to listen to them, which sometimes went for hours or until she fell asleep. She would wonder if they were thinking about her or if they were just here because she had a piano, but she could never really tell for sure. But she would just close her eyes and it would feel like a concert just for her. This post fascinates me. Chris is undoubtedly one of the most important characters when it comes to both Deltarune's narrative and more meta aspects, because aside from them being the character that we have control over, any information we can possibly learn about them without our influence on them could eventually lead to us learning more about what got them into their current situation in Deltarune, and I'd argue most importantly, why they're in said situation to even begin with. Yet, even with what we learn here, this ultimately raises even more questions, as I get the feeling that judging from their behavior, they've kind of just been like this, as in always doing things rather suddenly, being hard to read in terms of how they feel towards others. And the line about them getting very still, as if they were remembering something, sticks out to me a lot. I think whatever it is about them that's made them the way that they are, I'm willing to bet it must have been earlier in their life. I don't know how early exactly, but the fact that something stops them every time they hang out with Noelle, and their way of dealing with the sudden recollection is by playing the piano until someone walks in on them, really implies that there's something Chris might be keeping buried mentally. Maybe they just want to get really good at piano. Maybe there's something about playing the piano that helps them remember more or pass through more of whatever's on their mind, given they're said to sometimes play it for hours. But Chris and pianos, either way, just seem to go very closely together. For one thing, the audio that can be played on this page is just this mess of overlapping and echoing piano playing. It's hard to tell what melody is even trying to be played, if any, until it just becomes completely muffled. I like to imagine this as possibly how Noelle hears the piano until she falls asleep while Chris is playing it, but there's many open interpretations I feel for what this track's significance could really be. Overall, it does further
I
cement
don't
that
get
there's
that.
something
Why
very
would it... We know Chris is goated on the piano, right? So why would it be a like a mess when they play?
important to Chris about piano. We not only see pianos mentioned in Chris's room in Queen's Mansion and tutorials on playing piano, but we get a few opportunities to try play one in the game, and in both chapters, it doesn't really work out.
Maybe not then.
And Chris is apparently annoyed by it, which makes me think of something else. We now know that Chris doesn't really like to be watched when they play piano. They immediately stop as soon as someone
You see,
notices
you're
them,
like an
and
April
we know for
reference?
damn sure they're aware of us and how we're observing everything Chris does. I wonder if the reason the piano sounds so fucked when you try to play it in Deltarune is because they know you're watching and just feel uncomfortable knowing that you're watching them do
This is
everything
the
that
online
they do,
April reference.
including something that they're already a bit iffy with anyone seeing them do to begin with, let alone someone like us who's exerting control over them. It would fit in as well with how they very intentionally find moments to rip the soul out to make sure there's specific things that you don't get to control or even see Chris do. And it paints a very interesting picture already for not only what kind of person Chris really is, but how they feel about the player and their control over them. And we haven't even talked about the other private blog post that concerns Chris, this second one also involving Susie, this one being called The Newest Girl. Here Noelle mentions that Susie really hates Chris in particular for some reason, and that Chris just hasn't bothered to tell their mom about her bullying them, and hasn't switched seats with Noelle despite Susie never bullying Noelle at all by comparison. And she goes over one particularly worrying incident between Susie and Chris where Susie eats an apple that Alfie's had on her desk before threatening Chris with biting them in half too, since they've gone out of the way to use apple shampoo. And Chris starts snickering as if holding back a laugh, to which Susie throws the apple at them and Chris blocks it with their notebook and catches it before taking a bite out of it themselves. Susie gets pissed and grabs Chris by the hair, saying that one day their mom's going to get sick of them and that once she does, someone might make them disappear, and she'll realize how happy she was without them. Chris doesn't say anything, even after Susie yells at them to do so. And Noelle says that Chris's mouth looked like it moved, but so slightly that she couldn't even tell if they actually said something or not. But whatever they did or said, Susie suddenly shifted her whole demeanor, letting go of Chris and leaving the room really quickly. Noelle jumps into her locker, and all she could see was Susie leaving the school with her head held low before Chris opens her locker door, just stands there, and then slowly shuts the door and leaves. Now, obviously, the most common question that I've seen everyone have in regards to this post is, what the hell did Chris even say to Susie to warrant her attitude changing so much? And I think the most obvious things we can rule out would be anything in the form of a comeback or a snarky comment, as I'm pretty sure that would have just pissed Susie off even more. And honestly, with the fact that Susie really hated Chris in particular, it makes me wonder if there's some unspoken history between her and Chris that may even predate their time in hometown or in the school, considering that at this point Susie is considered as the new girl. Or if you want more fuel for this, there's a specific moment in chapter 1 where, after Susie threatens to bite Chris's face off, if you sprint all the way to the upper hall, she says something about how Chris would have experience with running away, as if she's known them long enough to notice it as a tendency that Chris has. Alternatively, it could be that maybe she doesn't actually know Chris from any point before hometown, but that she has been around other humans before that were afraid of her, so seeing a human act so unbothered under pressure would naturally confuse and frustrate the shit out of her. Yet, Chris...
I don't think it's human, I just think it's that, like, sometimes you just don't like people, unfortunately, even if they've done nothing wrong. And I think the fact that Chris was so unbothered by everything in the world, including Susie, and Susie, everyone usually reacts in a negative way, but Chris not even reacting at all, giving her any, even if they're reacting in a negative way, they're giving Susie attention, whereas because Chris was not giving any attention towards Susie, that pissed her off a lot. And I think that's why she began to hate them more and more. I don't know,
Those
that's
appearing to
my
be a bit
take on it,
unfamiliar
though.
with humans in general and
I'm
more
no
familiar
expert.
with monsters would see that Susie does stand out even as a monster, but understands them enough that maybe they know there's gotta be a softer spot for her somewhere and that she'll come around. We definitely see throughout chapters 1 and 2 that they sort of build their
No idea
friendship
what they could have
partially
said
off of
there.
having this mutual understanding of rejecting societal norms for their respective origins. Chris gets Susie, in a way, and Susie gets Chris just based off of that alone. So I think Chris would know better than to enable Susie's anger. They certainly seem confident enough to know how to act around her without getting into too much trouble, and without being as scared either. And it had to be something very brief too, like a few words, given that they were so quiet and subtle that for all we know, Chris might not have even said anything at all. But assuming they did, I have maybe 2 guesses. The first guess I have is that they probably said something actually really nice or surprisingly welcoming. I feel like Chris snickered at Susie not because they were trying to piss her off, and because, and this is my guess, they felt nice knowing that Susie actually noticed them using apple shampoo. I mean, we see said shampoo in the bathroom in Toriel's house, and even after this post in Chapter 2, Susie makes another comment about them using it after you do one of the letter puzzles, specifically the one that spells apple. And I probably do not need to go over
That's
the
really
fucking
good.
mountain of examples that show Chris has a particular fondness for Susie. They really do care about her a lot and enjoy having her around, even when she's being mean to them. For all I know, they probably did actually take Susie's comment in the post about Chris ending up like that apple as a joke. They found it endearing enough that they were trying to not laugh from that, not necessarily because they thought she was bluffing or they were being edgy or something. And as for what they could have said if it relates to this, it could be something like, "Glad you noticed," or "Thanks." The second guess I have, though, would be that they said something more genuinely worrying. Not a comeback or anything sarcastic, but just kind of a what the fuck kind of thing. Something that would have made Susie
That's
just feel
my
baffled
guess.
or have taken her out
Yeah.
of her anger completely. Most often, I see the guess for what they could have said in this context being possibly, "I hope so," or "do it," or something of that sort. Since people have noticed in Chapter 1 that even though Susie still bullies Chris, she does make an effort here to actually say that she won't bite their face off, because she wouldn't want Toriel to bury her own child and that they've got a good mom. Comparing that to the blog post where she outright says that Toriel will get sick of them eventually, and it's easy to connect the dots this way, thinking that perhaps Chris feels like a burden to their family and that they almost hope they're forgotten, or that Toriel gets tired of them for whatever reason.
I do think
Them
that
saying
is the
that would
unfortunate
probably make her
truth.
feel actually concerned if this is the case, enough so that maybe she just feel like she went too far. And on top of what would be Chris implying that she should make them disappear, I'd leave the room pretty quickly too if I was in her position. But another thing that might work in this sort of context, assuming that her and Chris have history, would be simply, "I'm sorry." Susie fucking hated Chris in particular. There's no clear reason why she picked so much on them specifically, considering that she's a newer student to the school and that Chris comes across generally as being a more timid and reserved person. Save for the occasional harmless prank that they played to get a quick scare out of people, but nothing more. But her hatred for them grew so bad that she outright hoped that their mom would get sick of them and that they would disappear in some way. If Susie and Chris have some kind of history that we don't know about, maybe they had a fallout at some point that led to Susie getting especially really upset with them as a result of something that happened. But I really feel like it would be the kind of thing where I can see Chris in that moment, knowing why Susie would be so upset with them in particular, and not having anything to say other than just, "sorry." Just an apology or showing that they're sorry for whatever it was that happened between them could have caught Susie off guard. Enough so that she would be rethinking everything that she was doing just then and just leaving the room quickly to just get herself together again. There could be some fuel for this too, as in Chapter 1, after Chris finds Susie eating the chalk, Susie just assumes that Chris is going to tell Alphys or someone about it and that they hope she gets removed from the school, to which Chris is implied to genuinely be kind of shocked to hear that, judging from what Susie says right after with "don't act shocked." They don't want to hurt Susie or put her in any danger, yet she's used to everyone thinking this way about her. So, without a doubt, people being kind to her or genuinely trying to be friends with and resolving stuff with her would definitely take her at least a little bit by surprise in my opinion. It kinda screams abandonment issues and a shitty home environment if you're asking me.
Yeah.
The fight against Lancer in Chapter 1 only adds to that.
And
not to
also,
mention
like, seeing Toriel being drunk, that one scene with Sans, kind of reflects the shitty home situation as well, and seeing, Yeah, it makes
Some of the parallels that Susie
think
draws to King's dialogue
a
in
lot of
Chapter
evidence
1.
for that.
Yet equally, there's still the chance that it's not necessarily because Susie and Chris had any prior history, but rather that Susie just has a bad history with humans in general, and her own preconceived notions of how humans or people in her past in general, human or monster, treated her, led to her forming this aggressive exterior, to the point that even if she's not trying to be intimidating, other monsters can help but assume that of her. Really, it could be any of these things that I just mentioned. Whether they were trying to be actually nice, or they hoped that Susie would actually make them disappear, or they were really sorry for whatever could have strained their friendship so much. They said something that made Susie start to shift her approach towards Chris over time, even if only slightly at first. Though, as much as I'm open to the idea that Susie just has a bad history with humans in general, and Chris being calm around her just caught her by surprise that much, part of me sort of doubts that someone who barely knows Susie would be able to get this kind of reaction out of her. Getting her angry? Of course. Maybe even making her surprised by acting a bit nice to her isn't all that unlikely. But the thing is, Chris isn't the only character who has shown kindness to Susie. I think back to that moment where Susie tells Noelle about when she let her borrow her candy cane pencil, and how Susie remembered that kindness from Noelle and didn't bully her because of that, and it makes me think that whatever Chris said couldn't have been so simply polite. Her leaving the room so quickly and holding her head low doesn't tell me,
something
oh
along
god,
the
someone
lines
was
of
nice to me and I wasn't expecting that. It tells me
self-hatred
something much
towards
deeper,
himself.
something that only Chris would have been able to evoke from her. I guess this is to say, in pretty much every case to me, it feels like it confirms that if there's anything to learn from this blog post in particular, it's that any potential history between Chris and Susie definitely goes further back than the school at least. And hopefully we get a better idea of just what that history might be, if there is any, but we'll never know for sure at the moment. After all, who knows what Chris is thinking? It's such an interesting development, these two posts specifically. They both give us a lot more information on just how Chris interacts with Noelle and Susie, and yet while being completely separate events, they both imply something about Chris that seems to stem from much further in their past. We have whatever it is that Chris remembers when they hang out with Noelle that prompts them to use the piano in the house. And we also have whatever history they might have with Susie and the fallout that may have occurred that caused so much tension between them. At the very least, we have two very important events within Chris's life that have been hinted at, which we don't quite have full knowledge of, yet they both impacted Chris a lot. I'd argue especially the former one with how it essentially autopilots them to the piano every time they remember that specific event at Noelle's house, and the latter one, if true, dealing a huge blow to Chris and Susie's friendship that only in chapters 1 and 2 is beginning to mend itself. Or at least, that is my best assumption, and perhaps I'm wrong somewhere, as a lot of this is still left very open. It's just as likely that I'm looking too deep into this, as we know that there's definitely more than just two very important events that went on in Chris's life that would contextualize how they got into the situation they're in now with us in the picture. Let's not forget, of course, that Chris's parents are divorced and that they probably have some very complicated feelings about themselves regarding their relation to their older brother. But I think either way, whatever happened, it will play a big role in the game, not just narratively, but
began to think about the fact that, like, what is Chris and Ezra's relationship like? I thought they were close, but like the fact that do you don't think there's resentment that he left for university and left them by themselves, or I don't know.
Narratively too. After all, Chris
I
is
never
the
thought
only
about
real view we have into this
relationship
game's
between
world, and I'm sure
siblings.
whatever they did or got themselves involved with to have us taking control of them will be reflective of the themes of the game and core to what Deltarune is ultimately trying to get at. But I think that finally does it for just these 2 pages. Although, there is one more set that I've saved for last. That being the very last few that were revealed during the sweepstakes before the finale video hit. This last set, I'd say, starts with the TV page that can be found in RAM, the page with the interactive green room. Clicking on the door on the right takes you to a page with nothing but this TV. The caption says that it's off, and there is nothing else to do in this page. Clicking on it does nothing, waiting does nothing, inspecting the code for this page you get nothing of note. However, people did discover there was a second spread associated with this TV, one where a red X is scribbled all over it. People wouldn't know what this meant or how to see it until the very last set of pages was revealed through the Spamton engraved wedding rings, starting properly with, "Damn you, Tana." The caption here says, "Delete this," and we finally see the TV with the red X over it. Accompanying it is text from Spamton talking about that damn boob tube who we can assume to be this Tana that has been mentioned in the URL. And highlighting the very bottom of the page, we see hidden text that just says, "Mike, singling him out as the only person Spamton isn't actually mad at here. This is where a lot of previous interpretations of Spamton kind of got thrown out the window. A lot of people were assuming that Mike was going to be the next antagonist to the game or the next secret boss, but what seems more likely is that Mike was actually just an associate, a good friend of his that had something happen to him. Maybe he's still a
I got
secret
a
boss.
question for you guys. Is whenever you meet someone in real life and they have a name from Deltarune, are you like, huh? Like, I'm sure you're not meeting many Sanses and whatnot, but like one of my coworkers, when I work security, his name's Chris, spelled the same way, but he's like this 35-year-old Polish tall guy, like, is not like Chris. Well, quiet, I will say, but I just think it's so funny. I'm curious, do you have any
wasn't mad at Mike, but rather
Mikes in your life, and you're like,
Antenna did something to really hurt Spamton and possibly also Mike. Hell, maybe he's the reason that whatever Spamton was doing or working with previously to become a big shot suddenly disappeared. Either way, you can actually click on the TV in this page, taking you to
the QR code.
A lot of noise. The caption now says, "You're early." Scrolling midway down, you get text from probably still Spamton just saying, "What are you doing here? You shouldn't be here." And at the bottom of the page, you can see two images of this same noise that blend in with the background, but scrolling does make them stand out a little more. The one at the very bottom takes you back to the green room page, but the one at the top...
Aren't you forgetting something?
It's just a blue screen. The caption, "Aren't you forgetting something?" Scrolling all the way up, you start to see white squares and rectangles of different sizes until you reach this pathway. It's all just white, black, and blue tiles, so it's hard to tell what it is, but it's clearly an entrance to some place. And clicking on the entrance, we get our final blog post from this event. Ice Palace Glacier. Here, Noelle talks about the Ice Palace from Dragon Blazers, something she mentioned once in Deltarune, but worth noting that unlike in Chapter 3, there is no additional number for the game, just Dragon Blazers. This might be the first game in the series that she's talking about rather than the third. She describes it as this ice area that, no matter where you go, takes you back to the same room, and that if you were missing a specific character from the party, you're basically just stuck in there forever, with the devs claiming it was the bad guy's magic spells, rather than just an oversight on their part. She would spend hours wandering in this place, thinking there was an exit, to which she reveals that there is one. After somehow going every possible direction, the last one being up, you find a door that doesn't appear anywhere else in the game. It shocked her so much that she unplugged the console by accident, but even when she started the game again, she was able to get back to the door pretty consistently. Although, she says that she doesn't know how, and it feels different every time. She ends the post, and that's it.
What happens when you go through the door?
Out of this. Not only a name drop for very likely the next main antagonist of the game, but also more allusions to this Ice Palace, and even more possible connections to make between it and Noelle in regards to how to navigate it, considering she mentioned she was able to find a potential exit to it consistently, even if she doesn't really understand how.
Was the door familiar earlier? That goes to Spamton, the same door that...
I'm pretty certain that we're going to run into the Ice Palace or a parallel to it in the game at some point, and that Dragon Blazers will become a more proper part of the game. If not in Chapter 3, then at some point in Chapter 4 or even 5. And we might need Noelle for if we ever see some equivalent to the Ice Palace, if not just that place straight up in the Dark World. I think this especially is a big reason why I feel the sweepstakes warranted its own segment in this series. In regards to the fact that Deltarune plays a lot already with the idea of making fiction within it itself already being fiction, there is a lot of emphasis and allusions to Dragon Blazers, especially in this event. The direct parallel between it and Deltarune in the code page, as well as pretty much implying we're going to see some version of the Ice Palace in the game, perhaps as a secret area or built up to a secret boss or even a normal boss, who the fuck knows at this point. It all points towards this idea that this game within the game that we already are playing is going to become more directly relevant. I'd assume as a Dragon Blazers themed Dark World, or it being a part of one, or even we just straight up play Dragon Blazers. Like, it's not even the Dark World anymore, but literally just a whole other game. Though that might not be much different, since the combat is implied to be similar to Deltarune's, according to Noelle at least. If anything, it's definitely a parallel, but I can't be sure whether there's more to it or whether it will become even bigger gameplay-wise or metafictionally. In fact, honestly, aside from the Spamton Q&A, there's really not anything left to talk about. That pretty much was all the essential stuff I wanted to go over before we finally finally get into the theory and what it can imply for the game going forward. In regards to the Q&A, I already mentioned the ones about Des and also him sending a Peepus to Noelle, but there's some other interesting things. Mainly him pretty much confirming elemental pairs to be a thing, some more insight into his divorce with Jevil, another nod to the egg referring to the white one as another man's treasure, so clearly not directly related to Spamton like the Peepus is, and further confirming that Mike is or was a good friend of his. And he even questions the person asking about Mike by accusing them of being part of that Cathode's crew. So Tana might have had something to do with Mike after all, or if not that, then Spamton did a lot to make sure Mike was left out of whatever Tana was doing. So essentially, just a few confirmations of things that we already had suspicions of, as well as doubling down on what was already made pretty clear through the sweepstakes itself.
I could have sworn there's a second sweepstakes, or maybe I haven't made that up.
I guess that's it.
Oh damn.
There was a lot for me to talk about just to get to this point, I'm aware. But I guess talking about the meta aspects of 2 entire demos, as well as whatever an outside source with 20-something pages of secret content might add to those aspects, definitely took longer than even I thought. Like, holy shit, I started writing the script for this in like October. Look where we are now. I also understand a lot of this discussion is stuff that's been covered a lot, by a lot of different people. But I feel like I didn't want to settle for just going like, oh, check out so-and-so's video like a dozen or so times.
Yeah,
I only
makes
really
sense.
did
I
that
feel like
here if I felt like it wouldn't add.
this is a good way to like get all the information. I'll get a lot of the information in one place, and if you wanna know more about specific things and watch
anything to my theory
videos on it,
anyway,
so yeah, that
but
makes sense.
finally coming over all this stuff after all the hype from Chapter 2 and the sweepstakes, and especially for Chapter 1 with how long it's been since Survey Program came out, felt like it wouldn't hurt to do. Absurd video length aside. And it doesn't help either that because of how Deltarune and Undertale blur the line a lot between what is solely meta and what is solely within the confines of the game, or what applies to both, it feels like I can't talk about just meta stuff without having to address certain characters like Chris or Noelle or what have you, because they might directly or indirectly play a part in it as well. Which, if my insane theory and guesses about how this game is approaching meta stuff is right, will explain why I even went through the effort I did to be this utterly meticulous with analyzing everything I could.
I like how they talk about the length of the video, and the next video is 6.5 hours.
So, 68 or so pages, 39 or so thousand words in, probably close to 4, maybe even 5 hours into the video if the words to minutes conversion I did was accurate. I think it's time. As I mentioned in the very beginning of this series, I do believe there is a reason, a structure to all of these things I discussed. The way the UI and menus were designed, the distinction in feeling and vibe between the light and dark worlds, the approach to the secret bosses, the addition of certain Easter eggs and secrets, and an entire secret route through exploiting some very specific abilities in the game, and the connection of main characters to a figure known entirely for his discovery through said exploits, data mining and file manipulation alike, the various allusions to said figure through certain signatures of his, not to mention the very intentional design of certain meta elements to stand out from everything else in the data, all have to come together to something, surely. Whether it's a message Toby is trying to get across to us, or just a very cool method of immersion on his part, I think there is a way to put this at least somewhat together with what we currently have. Let's completely throw analysis and objectivity out the fucking window now. From this point forward, we are going off the deep end, and you may as well just stick with me to face—
One thing I am surprised they haven't mentioned in this video or so far yet, but maybe it wasn't a big thing in the community in the first 2 chapters, was the lake and the noise within it. I'm pretty sure you speak to Onion-san in chapter 2, if I'm not mistaken. They've not mentioned it at all. I don't know.
the music if you somehow made it this far. Let us discuss the device theory.
Holy shit.
In part 3, that is. With the covering of the sweepstakes and also how fucking long this part already is, Jesus Christ, this marks the end of the second part of this analysis. If you have made it this far, then I appreciate it greatly. Part 3 should be coming after this one, so if you're curious to see just how far I end up going into complete theorizing insanity, feel free to subscribe so you know when it drops. I hope you'll end up enjoying it, but I really can't say for sure since at least with parts 1 and 2 there was plenty of objective stuff to dig into, but from here, you have no idea. But regardless, I do hope people will like the interpretations I've gotten out of everything thus far. If you enjoyed this, feel free to drop a like, or otherwise you can let me know what you think about what I've covered so far, and if there's anything that I might have missed or misinterpreted greatly. As I said at the end of part 1, this is a massive analysis, so I wouldn't be surprised if there are things I've left out. Even in the middle of doing the audio and editing, there are still new things I'm learning to account for, so I'm more than happy to hear what people have in mind. Either way, I hope you enjoy the next part.
Alrighty.
Catch you later.
Dude, so much information, really well made video. Like the previous one, I'm not surprised, you know, they know what they're doing. I'm gonna go into a blind. I hope that there is part 3 and 4 mentioned in the next chapter or next video. I'm assuming so, because I do not know how they explain device theory. I don't even know what device theory is at this stage, but for 6 hours, we'll see. I want to know, would you like the next video split up into 2? Because I'm scared to react all 6 hours. I'm gonna do it, but it might be more digestible. I'm gonna ask in the Discord as well, but if you want to comment down below and let me know your opinion, that'd be awesome. But as always, thanks for being part of my strange little world. I appreciate every single one of you liking, commenting, subscribing, and just curious my opinion on this thing. It's really cool, and I think you are cool too, so thank you for that. The next part should be out tomorrow if everything goes to plan, but yeah, let me know what your thoughts are down below. Let me know if I said some outlandish or outrageous takes on this video. I probably upset some people, and I'm sorry about that, but you know, I'm just a goober at the end of the day. But I hope you enjoyed watching. I'll probably catch you guys in the Discord, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.